Good morning. I want to piggyback a little bit on what Lauren was sharing. Like this is a day to hunker down and try to collectively answer the question. All right, what now? What next? But this is hard work. I'd probably say that over and over again. I also want to say that you're probably going to feel angry. If you haven't already, I suspect many of you have already, like you're going to feel that, and I want to encourage you to sit with that just a little longer than you might otherwise do, because I think the anger, when we start to confront things like this, can be a really healthy thing. It can be a useful impulse. It's all, like for men especially, I think it's always the place that men start when they hear about this, when they learn about it, but it's never the place we want to stay. But it is a good place to start. So I just want to acknowledge that. And just, again, a kind of a trigger warning, we're going to talk about some things that are hard, like what's already been said pretty much every time someone stands up here during our time together. Take care of yourself. If you need to step away to catch your breath, that's totally fine. What myself and our community of men want to bring to you today is three things. We want to add three things to this ongoing conversation. We're going to talk, and this is more the sequence than what's reflected in your schedule. We're going to talk about the larger ecosystem in which trafficking, sexual exploitation thrives. We've spent the last almost 14 years face-to-face with this ecosystem, and we'll talk a little bit more about that, not in great detail. I think we talked a lot about it last year, but we want to bring some qualified observations about this ecosystem, what fuels it, how it operates, and this is beyond simply law enforcement or policy, but this is more, a lot of it is at the cultural level. We also want to share some real-time intelligence about a specific emerging sector within this larger ecosystem, and it's going to open some eyes. And then third, we want to share some legitimate expert insight into how the justice system, nationally, but really more in Oregon, is engaging with this. And you're going to hear from JR, who is one of, I would say, conservatively, I think he's probably one of the top 2 or 3 guys in the country from a prosecution and a policy standpoint who understands this issue. So we're going to bring a whole bunch of that to you, and as well, we have 2 of our most amazing volunteer leaders who are here, who've been in the trenches doing this work. You're going to hear from all of us when we're done. So we're all here to help all of you understand the larger system that's in play here. So, like I said, you might get pissed off at some of the stuff you're going to hear. It might make you feel angry, and like that's not necessarily unhelpful. But like I said, it's a good place to start. It's not a good place to stay, and we want to move you to action, like Lauren said. But before we do that, I want you to have a realistic view of what we're up against, okay? Like Lauren said, we're focused on the demand. Sexual exploitation is a supply and demand business system, and that's been our lane for a long time. So we want you to get a clear picture of what we're up against. This is a book written by my friend Jewel. She's given me permission to share this part of the story. I've read dozens of books written by survivors over the years. Every one of them is good and painful and beautiful. This one is all of those, and it's a beautifully written book, but it's also probably one of the most difficult to read. Jewel tells the story of being sexually exploited as a child, and then eventually trafficked at around 13 or 14 into a pornography studio that specialized in that particular segment. And it's a gut-wrenching story of her exploitation. Her trafficker was her father. Zoe talked at length about that. Lauren and Zoe talked about that yesterday. So this is one of those scenarios. And she tells it was kind of the turning point in her story where the producer had come up to her and said, hey, I wanna make you a star, which meant he was gonna do a feature-length film about her exploitation. And by this time, mind you, it had been, I think, almost 10 years that she had been being regularly sexually abused. And so it wasn't that big a deal for her in terms of the experience itself, because she had already learned to dissociate at 13, 14 years of age. And so they made the film. And they kind of made a big deal of it in this greasy rundown warehouse studio, which was actually in Portland in the early 1980s, I believe, early mid-1980s. And they brought a bunch of guys together to premiere her first feature-length pornography film. And they brought her as well. They invited her to come to the screening room. And she said she walked in, she's 14 at the time, I believe, 13 or 14. She walked in, and there on the screen was this film. And as she looked at it, she said, I had known and I had been being abused, for years, so that that experience was normal to me. It's kind of all I knew. But when I saw myself up on the screen, she said it was the first time I saw my exploitation with my own eyes. And the result was visceral for Jewel. She dropped to her knees and she started vomiting convulsively at the sight of her own exploitation. The men in the room, there were maybe 10 or 12 men in the room, at the sight of her vomiting and on the floor, as if on cue, got up, surrounded her, and began to masturbate together. No one wakes up and decides to suddenly be that guy. The demand for the paid sexual access to the body of a vulnerable person begins long before that transaction or that moment in the screening room. Culture teaches boys, culture forms boys, and teaches them what to want, what to ignore, and what to excuse. This is the thing that's happening in the quiet spaces, in the kind of hiding in plain sight, that doesn't get the attention that it needs in these larger conversations. And that's what we want to add to this today. The decision to exploit a person begins much earlier in the messages that boys absorb about desire, about power, about entertainment, about sexuality. That means exploitation is not only a criminal justice issue, it's a cultural issue. And if we want different outcomes, we have to start having this conversation along with everything else that we focused on yesterday. So I want to say, though, if you're in law enforcement, especially, our experience, our reputation supports this. We support law enforcement. We have no problem with legal accountability for this kind of behavior. But what we learned early from law enforcement was one of the things that really set us on this trajectory. It was from law enforcement officers, experienced cops, prosecutors, detectives. What we learned was we can't simply arrest our way out of the problem. It's too big. There's too many other factors involved that are beyond the scope of what law enforcement is called to do. And I learned that from law enforcement. And I've also, as I've watched and gotten to know law enforcement and prosecutors, they have to do so much, oftentimes with so little, that they're they're already showing up and rolling up their sleeves and doing the work. There's work for us to do too. And so that's what we want to talk about a little bit more this morning. Let me zoom out a little bit though and help you see the scope of what we're talking about here. The National Human Trafficking Hotline identified 21,865 potential victims in 2024 alone. That's a 21% increase since 2020. So in case you have any sense that this is decreasing, let me set you straight, okay? So that's the National Human Trafficking Hotline. The Human Trafficking Institute, if we zoom out a little bit from more of a global perspective, they made this statement recently: the scale of commercial sexual exploitation remains staggering, with millions affected globally and demand continuing to fuel the market. So I think we're all in agreement that this is what's driving this kind of exploitation. This is a new one that I just heard from a friend a couple weeks ago. This is from NASDAQ, an annual report on global financial crime. $528.5 billion in human trafficking. This is globally, and this includes labor trafficking, but an annualized growth rate of 23.5%. This is financial crime. So this is the scale of this market. So think about the incentive to make money. Like, it's there, it's real. That's a $500 billion, right? Am I doing my math right? Okay, so this is what we're dealing with. And so what I want you to understand as we dive into this is this: every intervention, every safety plan that a victim service agency executes, every service referral, every case, every prosecution, every awareness campaign, every technology tool that's brought into this equation to try to deal with this issue, all of those things are a response to a harm that has already been committed, right? Demand is the source of that harm, and men are the source of that demand. Yes, there are women involved in exploitation, but by and large, we're talking about an issue that is man-made. This is a man-made problem. So I want to pose a question here. How do you solve a man-made problem without men? How do you solve a man-made problem without men? Yes, rhetorical, right? If you look around at this room, and I will say this room is different in a very encouraging way, but if you look around at events like this, anti-trafficking conferences, the leadership, the energy, the momentum, often, not always, but often comes from women who show up, women like Lauren, who show up and lead and do these heroic, essential things. But the men with the most influence over boys and young men especially, those are the ones that are often missing. And I learned this early on in this work, probably almost 20 years ago. I was asked to speak at a conference, hundreds of people in a room like this, and it was a day-long thing, and we weren't really all assembled until the end, and they asked me to come and be the closer, and I had this dramatic plan, and I was gonna, at the end, before I started Epic, I was a pastor for 30 years, so I dipped into that bag of tricks, and I thought, I'm gonna give a benediction to the men, a call to action. So I had it all timed out, and I was gonna turn up the house lights and ask all the men to stand, and in a room of 350 people, like 17 men stood up, right? So if you look around, like often it's the women that show up and doing the work. And what I want to say is men are often, like, we're late to this fight. We're needed desperately, but we're so often late to this fight. If exploitation is still growing, then we've got to start having this conversation. But before we can talk strategy, I want to go a little bit deeper into how this forms, how demand starts. And it starts the way culture teaches young men, boys, what to desire. I mean, think about the reality of our world, right? Pornography, social media, peer norms, all of those things are in play. And demand itself it's not an innate thing. It's not born within us. It's a learned behavior. There are masculine scripts. There are masculine narratives, I call them mythologies, that exist in our culture that shape what boys learn to desire. You have pornography, you have this hypersexualized media, peer validation of conquest. Like, that's just a really adult way of describing every middle school and high school locker room, right? And this is where this stuff comes from. And the lesson is the same. Sexual access equates with worth and power. That cultivated desire, if it's unchecked, and we're going to talk about ways to actually rein this in, but if it's unchecked, it becomes demand. Like I said, it's not an innate thing, it's a learned behavior, and the scripts that drive it are everywhere. You think of some of the dominant voices in our culture, people like Andrew Tate, and the things that they bring and the messages that they are delivering to millions upon millions of young boys, young men. So culture teaches us what to desire. Then it teaches us what to ignore. Demand Abolition did a study in 2019, and it said that only 20% of American men will ever buy sex. I was the guy in college who was thrilled to get a D in statistics, right? So when I heard this, I thought, hey, this is good news. 20%, 100%. So that leaves 80%, right, of American men who just need to be informed and motivated and engage, and we can solve this problem. Raise your hand if you think that was naive, right? I learned very quickly. 80% of men, they just need to rise up and we can shut this whole system down. The proliferation of exploitation, though, and the fact that it's continuing to grow would suggest that maybe that 80%, because they're having very little effect on the 20%, maybe those 80% in some ways are complicit in the problem. Maybe there's something in play here. And I struggled for a long time to try to figure out, okay, why is that? Why have the 80% of men who are not engaged in this been so impotent when it comes to influencing that smaller fragment of population? And I've come to think of it this way. Demand, that kind of amorphous thing, that market force that drives exploitation, is this vague, economists and theorists call it a distributed harm. It's this thing out there, but it's kind of hard to pin down. And because of that, no single buyer feels responsible for trafficking. In the work that we've done directly with buyers, we've heard umpteen variations of the script. Well, I would never be involved in trafficking, right? And so buyers, no single buyer feels responsible. That's the 20%. The 80%, it works this way. No single non-buyer feels responsible for trafficking. These are the I'm not that guy. You know, right? These are the ones who say, well, I would never do that. And then walk away from the problem, ignoring the fact that they might have some leverage and some influence that could change this outcome. But collectively, buyers and non-buyers, the I'm not that guy, both of those groups, by direct action or indifferent, sustain this market. And so it allows this kind of collective capacity to ignore this reality. Culture then teaches us what to excuse. Early on in our work, I heard one of our volunteers talking with a buyer on a phone, attempting to reason with him, trying to just talk man to man with him. And our volunteer was very astute, very skilled, and trying to make a reasonable point. And this buyer, who had been interrupted the moment he was trying to buy sex, cut him off mid-sentence, and he said, "Whatever, dude, I just want to get laid." And that statement perfectly captures the ethos of this market. So what happens, and this is my observation, okay, at this point it's that, our observation, whenever exploitation is exposed, the broader non-buying culture, other men, and a lot of times it's the "I'm not that guy," they reinforce the problem by offering just another layer of rationalization. This is the point where I call it the collective shrug. This is where people go, well, right, it's a victimless, what? It's a victimless crime. Or at least she's getting paid for it, right? Or boys will be, right? Or my favorite, and this is usually the biggest shrug, well, it's the world's oldest. Yeah. Anybody know where that actually comes from? Actually, it's a throwaway line in a 19th century poem written by a colonial British author named Rudyard Kipling. And he wrote it describing intergenerational prostitution in India, but he described it as a way to simply explain away a structure and a system that existed in colonial India that actually served the colonial ambitions of England. That's where it came from. So this is not a verified historical fact. It's a throwaway line from a poem, a work of fiction. But the cumulative and toxic effect of these narratives is what happens is all of this converts what should be the moral responsibility of the 80% of men who aren't engaged in this into moral distance. And so when we're talking now, when we try to talk about policy and how do we react to the harm, we never quite get to the root of the problem. It's never transformative, it's reactive, it's necessary, it's life-saving, but it never quite gets to the root of the problem. So I want to zoom this in a little bit, and I want to talk now about, or we're going to talk now about some things that are a little bit closer to home. And I want to bring up my teammate, my partner, Justin. We've been in the trenches on this for years, and so with all of the kind of the macro stuff in mind, I want you now to start thinking about, all right, how does this play out in my neighborhood, in my town, in my community? And we're going to take a deep dive into that.
Good morning. My name is Justin Utenheier. As Tom said, I have been doing demand reduction work for the last 14 years or so, but I don't really have a credential or anything that gives me an authority to come up here and present something to you all. I would say my authority lies in about 14 years ago. I heard this information actually from Tom, and I just decided I couldn't unlearn what I had heard, and I couldn't not do something. So I'm a guy who got impacted by the information, and I just kept staying curious about what can we do, what can we do, what can we do. And that's my credential for being up here. I've helped build a So for those of you who like to have applause, I would encourage you to stay curious and consider what you can do. So this is a new presentation for me. I normally speak about the platform that I've helped build over the last decade that teaches civilian men for how to directly engage sex buyers at the point of purchase. But we are going to talk about something a little bit different today. We're going to talk about illicit massage businesses, or IMBs. And so this is normally I start by trying to get the men in the community to start paying attention to the off-ramps that start coming up for you. You start thinking about work, you start thinking about your kids, you start thinking about anything other than what you're being presented, and you want an off-ramp. Because you know that this is going to go towards something that is a responsibility that you're going to need to hold. So now I would say for all of you, if you start to feel off-ramps coming up within you, do your best to just maybe tap the brakes rather than get off the ramp. So we're going to talk about illicit massage businesses. And before I tell you, well, can I just get a quick show of hands? Who has never heard of an illicit massage business before? Show of hands. Oh man, things are, okay, the awareness campaigns are working. That's great. So we all know what illicit massage businesses are, which is great because I'm not really going to do a whole like what they are. We're going to get into how they work a little bit. So I wanted to start with locally here in Jackson County. When we did some research, we found one illicit massage business in Talent, one in Ashland, and 22 of them in Medford. I don't know Southern Oregon culture very much. I don't know if there's a real competition amongst the local communities here, but if there is, I don't know who's the winner and who's the loser in this scenario. But this is what we found. And so this is one in Talent, Oregon. This is called the Zijin Foot Massage. The photo on the left there is it's just from the Google Maps listing. And what I want to point out about these is how ordinary they look. This is just a little home next to an independent tax specialist. So, in fact, I even read one review from the guys who go to illicit massage businesses prefer to call themselves mongers. So one monger review was like, you can go there and you can also get your taxes done. There's sort of just this casualness and callousness. But it just looks like a regular home. There's nothing particularly seedy about it. The photo on the right is from a website called RubMaps, which RubMaps is a website that exists exclusively for mongers to be able to go to these brick and mortar establishments and then report back whether or not you can find a happy ending at one of these establishments. So that's the one in Talent. Here is the one in Ashland, 99 China Massage. Once again, just looks like a regular home. You'll find a lot of these in strip clubs, and I'm sure you've seen them. You drive by, it talks about spa and massage, and it just doesn't look very spa-y or massage-y. It just looks a little like, perhaps a little rundown, very sort of 7-Eleven level branding, right? So another RubMaps listing for a 99 China Massage. The previous one did not have any reviews on RubMaps, interestingly. This one has 12 reviews, I believe the most recent one going back to 2023. So let's talk about IMBs by the numbers. In 2018, the Polaris Project estimated that there were 9,000. Now over 17,000 IMBs exist in the world. I'm just curious for you Starbucks fans, is this higher or lower? How does this compare to how many Starbucks are in the world? Or, excuse me, in the United States? Do you think, raise your hand if you think that there are more IMBs than there are Starbucks. There are, what is my number here? There are 16,875 Starbucks as of April 2026. There are more illicit massage businesses in the United States, and they're frickin', Starbucks are everywhere. So, a little bit by the numbers. It's a $5 billion annual business through IMBs, but 8 to 12 transactions. I'm not going to go over every single point here, but the key parts are 8 to 12 transactions per day with 6 days average per week equals 138,000 sexual abuse transactions through the United States illicit massage business industry every day. It's the second most, so the Polaris Project runs the human trafficking hotline, and IMB cases are the second most reported human trafficking cases that they get. Now, something that's really important to point out about IMBs is that it is overwhelmingly an exploitation of overseas Asian communities, specifically from China, is the number one importer of people who, well, importer is probably not the right word to use there, but people coming from China looking for a better life. And so that's how it works. There's a promise of a better life. And then once you're here, there's a capture of your documentation, and there's debt bondage. And basically, we brought you over here for your better life. Now you're in debt for all of the costs. I'm going to hold your papers until you pay it back. The interest rates are outrageously and unrealistically ever achievable, so they are just permanently in debt bondage. And then, within a very short period of time, they are sold into sex trafficking through the illicit massage business. They exist as massage parlors, nail salons, acupressure, spas, foot reflexology types of places. So this is a local listing here in Ashland of a website called Skip the Games, which is where, when we are doing our work talking to buyers at the point of purchase directly with our volunteers, of which you'll meet in a little bit here, we use Skip the Games to put our decoy listings out there. It's a known place for escorts and to originate prostitution dates. These are the two listings from yesterday in the escort section of Skip the Games for Ashland. So it's clearly not just massage. So I talked about rub maps a little earlier. This is an example of one of the ratings and reviews. I'd rather you read those things. I just don't want to say all this stuff out loud. But this is a singular review by a single monger rating a specific person on a specific date. And you can see the hyper-granularity with which they can rate the person and the establishment on. From pricing to body type to sex acts that they will and will not do, down to really specific vulgar granularity. I recently had a job where I was paid to read manga reviews for individual massage parlors for the purpose of establishing the difference between a legitimate massage parlor and an illegitimate massage business. And I can tell you that typically the stories that get us most, that can get us most upset are those, like the story that Tom told. But the stuff that got me the most upset was not the description of the acts, it was the entitlement around the disappointment when the person would not meet a particular standard. Oh, I came in for my rub and tug and she just looked so tired so I couldn't finish. That kind of hyper-specific objectification and entitlement to another person to do whatever you want to do was extremely difficult to me. And I can just tell you, as I was reading these reviews, I started to notice within myself, like, okay, I'm drinking poison here. So I've done enough of these things, so I've figured out, you have to do self-care. So my self-care was I had Ted Lasso playing simultaneously while I was reading Rub Maps reviews, and it somehow worked. I would read a review, and I would just burst into tears. And then I'd laugh, and then I'd go read a bunch of other reviews. And so it's the stuff happening inside IMBs is it's pretty horrific. Okay. So my friend Andrea Hines, and I'm going to talk about her story in a little bit here, but she calls them SEBs, sexual exploitation-based businesses. The point to know about them, whatever we call them, is they are organized, they are coordinated, and they are efficient. Okay? They are much more difficult to to deal with from a solution perspective. They are much more difficult to deal with. They are operating shadow businesses, setting up shadow registrations, and this is part of the work that I was doing before, is finding out who actually owns the business, what that's actually connected to. Is that a real business? It's a long rabbit hole, very difficult, and they can just move. They can just go to a new town. They can change locations, change buildings, change listings, change phone numbers. It's much more difficult because you're talking about entities rather than individual people here. And what we have learned through our law enforcement friends is that more often than not, IMBs are connected to larger organized crime. And that just takes a long time. I've heard stories of taking down individual IMB. You can take down an individual IMB, but again, it's kind of a game of whack-a-mole. But if you really want to take down a particular structure that allowed this IMB, that can take 2-3 years to really take down that community of organized crime. Okay, so how do they compare? So we've got street prostitution, we've got online listings like I showed you with Skip the Games and other known prostitution websites. We've got webcamming, and we've got IMBs. That's jingly. So how do these compare? They all vary in different ways, right? But what do you think is the same about all of them? Demand. Who said that? Yeah. Two people at the same time. Yeah, demand. What else?
Ease of use.
Ease of use. What's that? Affordability. Yeah. Interestingly enough, pricing is, mongers are really keyed in on helping each other figure out. It's almost like in a monopoly. In the reviews, they coordinate with each other to keep prices down. And if a monger comes and writes a review about how he paid more or tipped more based on a poor service, the other mongers, because you can reply to the reviews, the other mongers will jump on and annihilate that guy for having established a norm that they be paid that much if they haven't delivered a good service. So they are regulating within their own community to keep prices down. So what's in common? We have an exploitation of vulnerabilities. We have deception, the ease of use. It's hidden in plain sight. But most importantly, demand. So thank you to my people who said demand from the very get-go. Yeah, these exist because demand exists because people go buy them. No demand, no massage parlors. So what keeps them going? The United States is ranked the singular most secretive financial jurisdiction in the world. And I was telling this to the guys last night, and they're like, wait, no, not the Cayman Islands? Like, nope, not the Cayman Islands. The United States is the single most secretive financial jurisdiction in the world. And as my friend here said, it's hidden in plain sight. We've all driven by these things that have the flashy massage sign on them. And there's a reliance on these norms, right? And this isn't just for IMBs, but this leave everybody alone, let everybody mind their own business, don't talk about uncomfortable things like sex or prostitution or accountability or masculinity and all these kinds of things. All of those cultural norms, plus people having uninformed perspectives on how the sexual exploitation market actually works, means that they get to just kind of survive without impunity. And of course, again, demand. And if I feel like I could, with every single slide, just end with, and demand. Just really force it in, right? So I won't do that, but every time I click to a new slide, let's all practice a Pavlovian experiment here and just say, well, it's really about demand, and just really drive it in. That's why they exist, is because there is demand. So what's it like inside these? So there are, and I got this from my friend Andrea Hines, there are lineups inside these. Not every one you can make. In my job when I was doing research on IMBs, I sometimes would present as a decoy buyer trying to get address information. A lot of times the listings could be really confusing, and we needed really specific address information in order to try to pursue records. And so I would just every once in a while say, hey, where are you actually located? And some of them would just be like, oh, come on down as soon as you can, and start showing me a bunch of salacious pictures of the girls. Clearly not advertising massage. So some of them will do it that way, but others will go in and they'll have lineups. And Andrea tells the story of herself having to be in a lineup, and another girl she was in a lineup saying it was the most humiliated and objectified she had ever felt in her entire life. Having a guy walk up and just look around and then not choose her. You get fined for a whole bunch of other stuff. You get penalties if you're late. Floors on the mattress, cooking on rice cookers or a little hot pad, which is often an indication that it's not a legitimate massage business. If there's anything that indicates actual habitation, that's a clear indication that it's not a legitimate massage business. So Andrea's story. Andrea lives up in Canada. She was not trafficked by a third-party trafficker. And she was, however, experiencing a lot of debt. And so as a young woman, she read an advertisement for an opportunity to do some modeling. She followed that advertisement, which led her into being in an IMB up in Canada and all of the exploitation that happens there. And eventually she thought, there's got to be a better way to do this than the lineups and the fines and the violence and the abuse and all of that. So she thought that she could do it better. So she went into more debt and bought the massage parlor and decided that she was going to do it, and the women were going to be treated a certain way. It was going to be safe and all of that. And I was talking to her about this, and I said, I'm going to be giving a presentation on IMBs. Would you mind if how would you feel about giving me a quote or something like that? And she said, here you go. And she wrote out what it meant to go from being exploited in a IMB to owning one. And so I'm just going to read it in her own words. I've reached that age. Which classes do we? Okay. Owning a city-licensed, regulated brothel is by far the biggest regret of my life. I thought my business would be different, that I could shield the other women from the brutality of the buyers because I had already been selling my body for years. I thought I had figured out how to make selling sex safe. Media and public discourse always proclaim that there is a safe way to do this activity. I was so deeply captured by sex work ideology in my 20s and removed from my true self that I bought the lie hook, line, and sinker. I also thought that me being an active seller would make me a better owner, that I could empathize with the women because I was selling sex alongside them. I thought that by not fining the women for being late or for refusing a buyer, that I was offering them a safe or a good workspace. Reality hit me hard and fast, however. Seeing women stalling to enter the rooms to service the men out of dread, and seeing them exit the rooms either visibly distraught or heavily disassociated, made me realize that my clean and luxurious gentleman's spa was no different than if these women had been taken out back to the man's car in the alleyway and used there. The women were like robots operating on autopilot. Few had any good people or support systems in their lives, or viable opportunities for them to become all that they were actually meant to be. No one really spoke for the suffering we all endured in those rooms, but it was always there with us, like a giant elephant in the room that you couldn't ignore, but had to in order to not have a mental or emotional breakdown. The final moment where the lie could no longer survive was when a 19-year-old woman came out of the room sobbing after being in there alone with a 77-year-old buyer. As the owner, I immediately went into protection mode, asking the woman what the buyer had done. Had he strangled her? Tried to remove the condom secretly? This has happened before often. Through her tears, the woman told me, no, he didn't do anything like that, but when he touches me, it's like being molested by my grandfather. That was it for me. Immediately thereafter, I stopped renting rooms to other women, but continued selling myself alone in the brothel until 18 months or so later when I was finally able to exit the sex industry. I have tried to make contact with every woman I rented rooms to since exiting. I knew they all deserved an apology from me for being yet another piece of the harm that they were subjected to. Thankfully, I was able to speak with most of them and to apologize, and thankfully all who I spoke with said that they knew I was just trying to make it better for all of us. Although they have forgiven me, I will never be able to forgive myself. I was heavily suicidal for about 10 years after leaving the sex industry, largely on account of my regret and remorse and having a role to play in harming my fellow women. So when you hear people talk about female-owned and operated establishments that are licensed and regulated and safe, just know that it is all a lie to make both the buyer and the seller feel better about what actually goes on in those places. It changes nothing in reality. Only the people who stay forever scarred thereafter as a result. I would highly recommend that you get a chance to read her book, When Men Buy Sex, Who Really Pays, or to listen to any of her many video recordings or read any of her research and opinion pieces that she's put out. She's an extremely insightful and gifted speaker, writer, and researcher. So what can we do about this? It's not a simple solution. I mean, we know this. Many of you, this is the third time you've been to this conference. We know that ending trafficking is not a simple solution. But there are solutions, and it needs a collaborative approach. Law enforcement handling the criminal element, policy and legislation and kind of work within the public sector and private sector, advocacy for victims, and guidance for the movement. I'll say this. If you are doing a thing and it is an anti-trafficking thing and you don't have survivor or people with lived experience, not just there like to answer your questions, but meaningfully guiding and shaping what it looks like and providing you feedback about whether or not it's effective and whether or not it's creating harm, you're not helping. But most importantly, I would say, is us. Local pressure, shifting narrative. We cannot rely only on law enforcement and experts to end trafficking and to take down IMBs. There are things that we individually can and need to be doing.
Well, thank you. We're going to dip our toes in the water of prosecution today. But I want to thank those presenters and speakers from yesterday. I thought that was fantastic and really impactful. Law enforcement, thank you for being here, and all you here today. How many of you were at this conference last year? Okay. All right. Well, I like to start with one of my favorite places in the world. Gives me a little bit of reprieve before we start talking about some dark things. But I wanted to talk about 3 issues that I hope run along through my presentation. One is that as a prosecutor and investigator, we are running a sprint at the same time we're running a marathon. And it is dictated by the victims we serve. And I know wording is important. I use the word victim because it has a legal connotation in the Oregon Constitution that I think that is appropriate for what I do. But sometimes it's a sprint, sometimes it's a marathon. There have been cases in which I've met a young woman, a young victim at 3 in the morning, and she is in grand jury at 8 a.m. that same morning. There are cases in which I have met a victim and she was ready 16 years later, and we indicted her trafficker 16 years after her trafficking incident. And so sometimes it's a sprint, sometimes it's a marathon, and really being victim-centered and trauma-informed will help law enforcement and prosecutors decide where to go and how fast to move. And that can be challenging and frustrating. I'm going to be completely honest. There are some times that I watch an exploiter, a trafficker, continue to exploit and traffic individuals, but those individuals aren't ready to come forward, and it can be tough to watch that. It can be tough to know that in my community and kids in my community are being exploited, but I do think that that is the best practice of a prosecutor and investigators. The second part I wanted to talk about is meeting victims where they're at. For law enforcement, for prosecutors, and I hope that those of you who are not in law enforcement, you can see a little bit of what we do and the challenges we face, because as Justin said, and I completely agree with him, that it takes a community, and we'll talk about collaboration in a second. But I hope to never meet a victim at the courthouse in a suit for grand jury. That should not be the time I meet that victim. As you can imagine, that victim is anxious, scared, worried, and also running through their head speaking to a whole bunch of strangers about some of the most traumatic and traumatizing times in their life. So I like to meet victims where they're at, whether they pick a coffee shop or an advocate's office, or sometimes it's right as they're meeting police, not wearing a suit, not going through a metal detector, to get them to understand that I'm going to meet them where they're at. And I think that's changed a lot of my cases and a lot of our investigations by just letting them understand that the first time you're going to meet the prosecutor isn't in the courthouse going through security where he says, "Hi, nice to meet you. We're going into grand jury right now for you to tell your story." And so that's the second thing, is to meet them where they're at and to help them feel comfortable with the process and guide that process. Okay, so I'd like to start with the most intriguing part of my presentation, the law. No. But I want to explain that there's some things we're working on. So this happened just a couple months ago. We've been fighting for this for many years. This allows us in Oregon to use statements by victims, whether or not those victims are willing to testify in court. There are a lot of nuances associated with this. There was some give and take at the legislature that I may not be as happy with as my original draft, but it's awesome. And it allows us to do a lot of things, and one of which is just the negotiation part. My goal as a prosecutor is to prosecute traffickers without having to take them to trial, because that is just additional trauma for a victim. And so if I can say to that trafficker, "Hey, by the way, even if that victim's not ready or does not want to show up, their statements are going to come in through this new exception," I think that's a win for us. So that's the first thing I want to talk about, is there's some movement going on. In fact, while Justin was talking, I just got a text from Attorney General, Assistant Attorney General in Oregon, who wants to work on some of our other laws. So there's some good work being done in Salem by some good people. So I wanted to go through the laws real quick because I think it helps us understand in Oregon what law enforcement has to investigate, what prosecutors have to prove, and it's different than the federal law. You heard Lauren talk about yesterday force, fraud, or coercion. That's federal law, and for a while I was a federal prosecutor and did federal sex trafficking crimes. In Oregon, it's a little different, and I will say right now, I actually prefer prosecuting traffickers stateside. I actually think we get longer sentences stateside. In my experience, I can get a longer sentence in many cases in a state court, even in Multnomah County, as opposed to federal court. I've been a prosecutor for 21 years, and 18 of those years, I've been doing trafficking work and running the human trafficking unit. So, just to go quickly through this, in Oregon, it is an offer or an agreement. It does not have to be a sex act. It's an offer and agreement for sexual contact or conduct for a fee. So just an offer and agreement is enough for the charge that is the basis for the next couple charges we're going to talk about. That even applies to when it's a minor. So an offer and agreement for someone you believe is a minor, even if they're an undercover officer, is enough for purchasing sex with a minor. And there are some defenses that some legislatures wanted to put in here for if that minor is 16 or older, or if that officer posing as a minor is 16 or older. So there's some nuances here, but it's still an offer and agreement. The main crux of prosecution in Oregon for trafficking prosecutors are two different laws. The first one is promoting prostitution. So when I use the word prostitution, it's because legally that's still in our vernacular in Oregon law. And that's okay for right now. I have noticed that trying to change some of this actually moves us backwards because of fiscal and all sorts of things. But in promoting, this is any third-party facilitator. So it does not need to be just a trafficker. It can be a motel manager. It can be an Uber driver. It can be the mother of a trafficker. We'll talk about that in a second. I have some case examples. But there are many ways to get to what's called promoting prostitution. It is a sex offense, so you have to register as a sex offender. It's a felony. It's a level 8 for those of you who know the sentencing grid block, so it's prison eligible. And it's either someone who owns or controls or manages a location, or induces or causes a person to engage in prostitution activity, receives or agrees to receive money that they know comes from a prostitution activity, or aids or facilitates any act of prostitution. So if I give you my cell phone and say, hey, post that picture I just took of you on to Skip the Games, am I aiding and facilitating an act of prostitution? I absolutely am. That's a charge of promoting. If I'm sitting in jail and I am asking a victim to put money on my books that I knew came from prostitution, am I agreeing to receive money that came from prostitution? Absolutely. So it's a very broad charge. It's fantastic. And we've worked hard to change some of this language to make it as broad as possible. And this applies to third-party facilitators. And so I want you all to know, in my experience, that when my team arrests and prosecutes a trafficker, there is a huge sort of group of individuals that surround that victim that are related to that trafficker. And so this allows us to get at some of those other individuals who are tampering with, benefiting from, aiding and facilitating that prostitution activity. And then the other charge I want to talk about is compelling. So compelling is a ballot measure 11 charge. In Oregon, ballot measure 11 means mandatory minimum sentencing, and a compelling is 70 months mandatory minimum. That means whether you have a long criminal history or no criminal history, a judge cannot go below 70 months day for day. You do not get any credits other than credit for time served. And in compelling, it's force or intimidation. So that's different than force, fraud, or coercion. It's force or intimidation, or inducing or aiding someone under 18 years of age, whether you know their age or not, or inducing a family member. And each act of prostitution, I argue, is a separate harm. And when it's a separate harm, a judge can run those charges consecutively. And so you can imagine, as those individuals who know or who have seen individuals being trafficked, they're victimized multiple times daily. And so ultimately, there is a significant amount of exposure, I guess is the best word for it, for traffickers by the way these statutes are set up. Okay, we got through the most interesting part. You guys can all leave. Collaboration. Let's talk about collaboration for a second. Justin hit on it. I am a firm believer in collaboration. In 2008, when I started doing this work, I could not have done this work except for this community of individuals who educated me and helped me and were able to help victims. I want to be clear, when I talk about victim-centered and trauma-informed, prosecutors should and law enforcement should feel that the healthier a victim is, the better your investigation is. Of course, that's not the point, but we have the same goals. We should have the same goals. We should have the same motivation. If you've heard me speak before, I use this book a lot. I love this book for the reason that it gets me in the head of traffickers. So this is a book called The Art of Seduction. This trafficker used to highlight points in his book, but I think it's one of the best ways that I can explain to a group of people who want to get involved why it's important to get involved. So, I'm going to change a couple words here. Your worst enemies in trafficking, because this is a trafficker's book. This is a book that a trafficker studied, made his victim study, are often your target's family and friends, right? People who want the best for your victim. They are outside your circle and immune to your charms. They may provide a voice of reason to the seduced or the victim. You must work silently and subtly to alienate the target from them, insinuate that they are jealous of your target's good fortune in finding you, or that they are parental figures who have lost a taste for adventure. The latter argument is extremely effective with young people whose identities are in flux and who are more than ready to rebel against any authority figure, particularly their parents. You represent excitement and life. The friends and parents represent habit and boredom. So you should feel proud that you are the enemy of traffickers. People who care for victims, people who want the best for individuals in your community. Traffickers view you as their enemy. That should be a badge of honor. When I read this, I think, okay, maybe we're onto something. So I want to first talk about who these individuals are. We're going to be talking about traffickers and buyers. I overlap them in many ways because I will tell you that in many cases, the victims I work with actually are more concerned about me prosecuting certain buyers because of how violent and controlling and scary they are. So there is no hierarchy of traffickers are worse than buyers. They're both very bad. And in fact, in many ways, victims of trafficking are more concerned about their buyers also because they don't have that trauma bond. They don't have that link with their buyers, that loyalty, that sort of emotional pull that they do with their buyers. So this is a quote from a trafficker I prosecuted in federal court. This trafficker was extremely effective at trafficking. He trafficked young women out of Hollywood, California. He would take them to the Grammys, the Emmys, the Hollywood Mansion. But I want you to notice what he says here because we're in Ashland, Medford, Oregon. I was never one of those guys who went to strip clubs or nightclubs to knock a girl. That means to recruit a victim. I like playing small rural cities with small populations. I usually hit places like the mall, Walmart, and fast food joints. I give them my business card and then I show them a few pictures with me with my celebrity friends. I flash a wad of cash so big it could choke an elephant, and then I come at them on some modeling or you should be an actress type shit. Within an hour, they're usually hook, line, and sinker. So if you don't think trafficking happens here, if you think trafficking is a big city thing, if you think, well, we may have buyers here, but traffickers are just on their way between 2 points, you're wrong. Traffickers focus on areas like this because they're looking for vulnerability. And some of the ways to make people vulnerable is to isolate them, to take them from one place to another, or just to isolate them emotionally. And so when we talk about traffickers and buyers, we're talking about individuals like this. Recently, earlier, is it still this week? Well, maybe last week, a friend of mine, Yasmin Vafa, wrote an article for Mrs. Magazine, but I wanted to quote part of it. I thought it was really powerful. She sent it to me a couple days ago, and we were chatting about it. She's talking about trafficking and buying. It shows up in entertainment and media that normalizes sexual commerce in teenage girls. In shows like Euphoria that frame prostitution as character development rather than violent exploitation. It appears in legislative chambers in Colorado, Illinois, and New York, where acts of pimping and purchasing sex are being replaced with frameworks that effectively decriminalize the entire sex trade under the guise of bodily autonomy and women's empowerment. I am not against protecting vulnerable people. I am against the sleight of hand that reframes a demand-driven industry built on the bodies of women and girls. Overwhelmingly women of color, disproportionately survivors of prior abuse. As a pathway to economic self-determination, when lawmakers tell women that prostitution is the answer to poverty, they're admitting that they have no intention of addressing their material precarity. That's not offering them liberation. It's managing exploitation more effectively. It's a fantastic article. I would love to read the whole thing, but absolutely. So let's talk about personality disorders. We're talking about traffickers. Let's talk about personality disorders. Under the DSM-5, it defines a personality disorder as an enduring pattern of inner experience and behavior that deviates markedly from the expectations of the individual's culture. They are some of the most difficult disorders to treat in psychiatry. This is mainly because people with personality disorders don't think their behavior is problematic, so they don't often seek treatment. It's really important. Okay, so we're going to talk about psychopaths and sociopaths. When I started to do a little bit of research on this and figure this out, it was early on in 2008, and there was this special parole and probation section at Multnomah County. And they were for people who scored high in psychopathy. So they would actually evaluate all their parolees and probationers, and the ones that scored extremely high in psychopathy, and they would put in a special program because they needed to be dealt with differently. Right? They just don't respond to some of the other things probationers do. There was about 35 individuals in that program when I started, and by the end of the year, we had identified that all 35 of them were traffickers. It didn't mean they were in for trafficking. In fact, none of them were in or on probation for trafficking. They were in for assaults and domestic violence and drug dealing and robberies and burglaries. But when you looked at those people who independently had been evaluated as high psychopathy, they were all traffickers. So the Hare psychopathy checklist is a way to determine, it's one way to determine if someone is a psychopath or has psychopathic tendencies. And the way you do that is you score a 0, 1, or 2 in many categories. And if you score over a 30, your psychopathy is enough. Now, I'm not a doctor, but this is in the DSM-5. It's pretty easy to do. We're going to do it for just a second because I think it's really fun. I do it with judges sometimes. So traffickers, you know. Glib and superficial charm, 0, 1, or 2? 2, right? Exaggerated high estimation of self, 2. Need for stimulation, pathological lying, cunning and manipulative. You can see that you can get to 30 real quick. And I think that's important to understand what we're dealing with, who we're dealing with, and who is actively seeking to exploit our most vulnerable. And they're good at it. They're smart at it. And they're doing it because, right, callous and lack of empathy, parasitic lifestyle, all those fit. If we move on to narcissistic personality disorder, it's defined as a pervasive pattern of grandiosity, need for admiration, and lack of empathy, with entitlement, exploitiveness, arrogance, and envy. So under narcissistic personality disorder, you need 5 of the 9. I bet you get to 9 real quick. And so understanding this, Tom talked about reading a lot of victims' biographies. I've read those as well, but I read a lot of traffickers' biographies because I want to know who I'm prosecuting. I want to get in the minds of those individuals who do this. And I will tell you that these match. I don't know what came first, whether they diagnose these based on traffickers, but it is the definition of trafficking. It is the definition of using another human being to get what you want out of them. Okay. Like I said, we're going to move pretty quick. So from your perspective, whether you're law enforcement or not, what do you think the biggest challenges in human trafficking cases are? You can just shout it out. Resources. What? Cooperation. Cooperation by who? The victim. Okay. What else? Evidence. Money influencing things? Okay, I think that's what you said. Great. What else? Apathy and toxic masculinity. Okay. I thought I heard something over here. Jurisdictional gaps. Okay. Yes, those are all big things. I'll tell you that most prosecutors, traditional prosecutors I call them, I'm sure they don't like that phrase. You have a victim that calls in and says, I want to press charges. My car was stolen. I was shot. My home was burglarized. I want to press charges. I will see you in the morning at grand jury, and I will collect all the evidence. And there are people who witnessed it. And the police showed up. That's not how these cases happen. In fact, when I started this, I told the detectives I was working with, every case you see is going to be a dog. It's going to be a bad case because the evidence isn't going to look right. You're not going to have a victim who wants to talk to you at all. You're not going to have witnesses, but we're going to work these cases. Because that's what it looks like. And it's going to take a special kind of investigator and prosecutor to be able to say, no, I can't prove that. I'm not going to do that. I'm going to focus on these cases over here instead. They're challenging. They're difficult. They're hard. And so when people ask, why aren't more individuals being held accountable? We're trying. That's, I guess, what I'm going to say. They're very difficult cases because the rules of the evidence code and other things, you have very few witnesses, and of those witnesses, you have very few who are going to testify. And you have a lot of things that are very difficult to explain to an uneducated jury about the dynamics, the actions, the words, the statements of individuals, including the most vulnerable victims and most vulnerable people in your community are those victims. And sometimes it takes 3 or 4 interviews to get them to the point in which they're comfortable talking. Sometimes 6, sometimes never. And that can be really difficult. So I'm going to talk about, for the next little bit, some of the ways in which we try to make up those things, some examples of ways that prosecutors and investigators try to bridge that gap, because it is such an important and serious thing in our community. This is a busy slide, sorry. But collaboration and cooperation is a huge thing that we try to do. So I try to put the victim and the defendant together as much as possible, whether that's driving in a car, renting a motel room, whether that's seen at a grocery store, because the more I can put them together, the less the defense of, I didn't know what they were doing, I barely met them, they're doing their own thing, I had no idea. That doesn't fly anymore. When a jury hears, oh, they texted 150 times a day for the last 6 months. I try to corroborate victim statements. It does not need to be about the crime. A lot of prosecutors and detectives think, well, I need to corroborate the crime. So the elements of the crime are this, this, and this. I need to corroborate that. That's all very helpful, absolutely. I try to corroborate any little thing I can, because I will tell you that jurors love that. They love to hear that, oh, the victim said this, the detective went out and confirmed that, had nothing to do with the case. They feel like they're detectives. They feel like they're in CSI. They like that, and so we'll give some examples of corroborating things that are not elements of the crime. I have the standard of beyond a reasonable doubt, and I believe that's the standard I should have. It's a high standard. I don't believe it's an impossible standard, but when you're a jury, you hear from defense attorneys, it's the highest standard in the land. And you can only vote guilty if it's with a moral certainty that this happened. Apply that to a case like trafficking. Apply that to jurors who hear that there were 6 different statements made in the course of an investigation. Right? That can be difficult. So beyond a reasonable doubt is a standard I gladly accept, but it can be challenging. We have the CSI effect. I'm going to educate you right now if you don't know. There is no machine I can put in some carpet and it's going to tell me where it was made, where the dirt came from, the dye that was used, and the hair that was from the 4 people in it. That does not happen. Most of the time, the lab won't even test things. I'm just telling you right now. Simple things, DNA. So I have to deal with CSI, for those of you who like CSI. Traffickers, as we just talked about, are aggressive narcissists, they're psychopaths, or sociopaths. They are not going to take a plea unless it is the last choice they have. Their backs are against the wall. They've had 6 or 7 different defense attorneys who have all told them the same thing and they've fired them. They're about to go to trial and they realize what's best for me is to take a plea because this train is coming. And so I like to make that train as big as possible. Because no traffickers start out like other defendants and say, I really don't want a trial. I'm going to try to get the best deal I can. Traffickers are like, victim's not coming. Juries are going to believe me. I'm going to talk my way out of it, and we're going to trial. Unless you dismiss this case right now. That's usually my first conversation with traffickers. So I have to show a strong hand. I also really feel like taking the weight off victims' shoulders is important. Hence the hearsay exception. Hence, trying to find buyers and witnesses that I send to prison and flip them to make them testify against so that there's not just this victim standing alone, because most of the times that's what happens. Victims of trafficking are there by themselves, their family's not there, they're standing alone, and they feel like Between me and the defendant, I'm the only one that's stopping the state from sending that person to prison. We discredit defendants, make our law enforcement look objective. I know down here that probably isn't a problem. In Multnomah County it is. I have to make those juries feel like they can trust law enforcement, so that's challenging as well. And then we try to be creative because traditional ways don't work. Not only do traditional ways not work, as you just heard, traditional ways, or even creative ways, is not going to solve and bring our way out of this. And that's why you've heard from so many people that are not law enforcement, that are not prosecutors. Okay, so let's talk about buyers. You've heard a little bit about them. They're organized. It was a shock to me at first. They are so organized that when I do something in Portland, Oregon, I get people from Boston trying to take my job away from me and emailing my boss and emailing the bar and making complaints against me because they're organized, right? They do counterintelligence. We have buyers who post the license plate of our undercover vehicles within hours of our missions, the hotels in which we're doing missions at. When we fly a plane as surveillance, we have buyers that will post within the hour, PPB has a plane up, they're doing a mission in this area. So they're organized, for sure. But they are super dangerous. Many buyers I prosecuted are serial rapists and sex offenders, are some of the most violent individuals that I've seen. And when we listen to victims and when we're victim-centered, you will hear that from them. Pretty powerful, right? Okay, I'm going to skip through this. We only have a minute left. So let's move on through this. Oh, I want to talk about two things before we end. One is Oregon has a 3 strikes you're outlaw. So traffickers are eligible for life in prison on their 3rd conviction for a sex offense. In addition to that, some of these charges I showed have mandatory minimum 25 years. We are right at break time, so I'm going to stop there. I appreciate all your time in this. Hopefully that gave you a little insight into how prosecution investigations work. I know we were just dipping our toe in the water. Thank you for being patient and going through these quick, and I'll see you after the break. Thank you.
All right, we have a little bit more to do. We're going to have some question and answer. This is all going somewhere very specific, but let me kind of review what we've covered so far this morning. We started making the point that we can't arrest our way out of this, and that is because there are cultural forces that are shaping and forming young men, many of whom turn into buyers over time, and we have to have a clear sense of how that works and what that is and where those things are playing out. So we talked about that. Then we kind of zoomed in specifically on a segment of the market that is emerging to meet the demand that is being fostered all along. But then at the end, we kind of came back to JR's presentation, which I greatly appreciate. Even though we say we can't arrest our way out of this, that's not to say that arrest isn't important and very complicated. And thankfully for people like JR, it's actually very, very effective. And I want you to know I've traveled all over the country with JR and presented. He could probably do this entire conference with all the things that are in his head and heart and all of his experience. So you got just a little bit, a sliver there. But if you're feeling like I'm feeling at this point, like there's another question that just lingers, like why is this so hard? Why is it so intractable? Why is it so persistent? Why can't we get on top of this particular issue? And as I have observed, just thinking of my own self, my own experience in this work, there's this kind of equilibrium that exists. And so the way I see it playing out is to help a survivor of exploitation is a very morally affirming thing to do. Like it's the right thing. It's always the right thing. And it's always the first response to exploitation is to do whatever's necessary to help these people remove themselves from the harm that they're experiencing. So that's very clear, and it's very affirming. It's the right thing to do, right? And punishing traffickers, I don't know if you experienced this as you were listening to JR unpack some of this, it's like morally satisfying. How many of you felt that? Like when he was kind of telling some of these stories, like, yeah, it's because it's there is a bad guy. There is a bad actor in this, and there is a sense of satisfaction in knowing that at least someone's receiving justice, right? Here's the problem. So helping the survivor is affirming, punishing the traffickers or the buyers is satisfying. Like that gives us some sense of moral stability. But confronting demand, and by that I mean ordinary men acting in what is normalized behavior patterns, which is a lot of what Justin kind of unpacked for us. You can see how normalized this behavior is. Confronting that part of this equation can be morally destabilizing, because to center demand in these conversations is to implicate people like us, people like me, institutions we trust, cultural norms and systems that we participate in that we really don't think a lot about. So if we're going to go there, it's going to be really destabilizing. And it's not going away, right? Like I shared, for all the work that we've done for the last 25 or so years nationally to address sexual exploitation, it's not going away. It doesn't appear to be slowing down. I showed you that statistic about the size of the market, $528 billion. And again, that's labor and sex trafficking. But when I began this work, that estimate was somewhere around $2 billion. So it's not slowing down. It's hard. This is hard work. But it's not going away, so what do? I want to hang one more picture in the basement of your mind, and you may or may not like me for this, but I'm going to do it just as an avatar to help you, remind you that this is not going away without all of us engaging the issue collectively. Here you go. You're welcome. I have been haunted by this story, and I think this serves, and this is the reason I'm sharing it, I think this can serve as a marker for us going forward when we leave this time together, because I don't think this is going away anytime soon. So I want to encourage you to let this annoying, that's to put it mildly, but this infuriating image remain in your mind as a prompt, and I hope that it helps you realize that this is not going away without all of us engaging. And as I've been rustling through it, I wrote something. The QR code will take you to the article if you want it, but if it's okay with you, it's not long. I want to read this to you, and just let it speak for itself. It's called Epstein's Gamble. For years, sex trafficking has been framed as something that happens out there. The cast of characters include foreign cartels, violent pimps, and shadowy networks in faraway places. The villains were always outside polite society, and for those of us removed from this dark world, framing things that way gave us comfort and the illusion of security. But the renewed scrutiny around the files connected to Jeffrey Epstein and his criminal network has exposed something far more unsettling. Exploitation doesn't just hide in dark alleys. It thrives in well-lit rooms, in places of power, respectability, and influence. Epstein didn't invent sex trafficking, but he did scale it to an industrial level, providing access for powerful and predatory men who assumed they were insulated from their accountability. They were willing to pay for sexual access to kids because they were making the same bet Epstein made. No one really cares. While enormous, justifiable public outrage focuses on this case, there's a deeper issue that is at risk of getting lost altogether: the demand operating system that fueled this activity. Trafficking is not sustained primarily by traffickers. It's a market system sustained by buyers. And buyers are not rare monsters. They are ordinary men, married men, successful businessmen, struggling day laborers, and software developers. The only difference between these guys and the redacted names on the list, whose names have yet to be revealed, is a layer of insulation that exists between their activity and public exposure. Insulation from accountability is costly, and more money means more coverage. But survivors will tell you that in America, a man, any man, is more likely to be struck by lightning than arrested for buying sex. Now, you may object and say, well, those guys were looking for consenting adults, certainly not minors. And I used to think this way, too, until I learned that there isn't some separate, organic, free trade market for paid sex where the consumer can be assured that their purchase is consensual. The same market that contains willing workers is also full of unwilling and often minor victims. I believe Epstein knew this and bet that his power, wealth, and status could protect him from accountability, and that no one would care. He was wrong about himself, but he may not be wrong about the rest of us. Ironically, what unsettles people about the Epstein case isn't just the crimes, it's the ecosystem in which the crime flourishes. Assistants schedule sessions. Executives socialize in designated spaces. Adjacent institutions ignore the likelihood of this behavior, while friends joke and bystanders look the other way. What most don't realize, though, is that this same framework exists, though on a much smaller scale, in every scenario where people are bought and sold for sex. Think of what Justin unpacked for us. The result is, whether it's a salacious global front-page story or the lonely gamer in his parents' basement buying sex because of a profound sense of isolation, it's the normalization of renting another human body, most likely against their will, for nothing more than ejaculation. Exploitation rarely survives on force alone. It survives in silence, when polite people declare it's not our place to judge. Or the "I'm not that guy" says, "I'd never do that." It thrives when men who don't engage this market say or do nothing to those who do. Jeffrey Epstein was a monster, and his actions are worthy of condemnation and accountability. But the real danger isn't simply one bad man. It's the culture that enables bad men to grow and flourish in their sexual predation. Trafficking follows markets, and markets follow demand. For decades, anti-trafficking work has focused on managing the outcome of this demand. So we worked to help create exit pathways for victims. Then we created a system to deliver life-giving services to them once they did. Then we prosecuted the traffickers who managed the business of exploitation. But Epstein has revealed the next evolutionary step in our collective response to this evil. We must do more than manage the outcomes of this system. We must dismantle it at the root. If cultural norms around buying sex remain insulated, whether in billionaire boardrooms or local neighborhoods, exploitation will simply morph and regenerate. If the market, the ecosystem that sustains it, is never exposed and dealt with, it remains redacted, just like the names on Epstein's list. Epstein's gamble wasn't just that he could get away with it. His gamble was that we would never confront the broader system that helped make him wealthy and powerful. His gamble was that we would consume the scandal, condemn the villain, and move on. He gambled that we would never ask harder questions, like, why is buying sex so easy and so culturally tolerated? Why is accountability so rare? Why do powerful men and many average men expect to escape accountability? Public scandals create brief windows where cultural denial weakens and our collective defenses soften. They are moments of reflection that have the potential to foster real change. But windows close. If this moment ends with outrage but no structural shift, no cultural accountability for the demand for paid sexual access to the bodies of children, youth, and other vulnerable people, then Epstein's larger bet will have paid off. If this window closes with no real change in the way our society operates, then Epstein was right. No one really cared, at least not enough to examine the market, to strip away the layers of unjustified insulation and protection from men who inflict this violence and the culture that perpetuates it. No one really cared enough to challenge the norms that allowed the system to hide in plain sight. Ending trafficking requires more than condemning traffickers. It requires a comprehensive response to demand. The question is not whether Epstein was guilty. The question is whether we are willing to confront the culture that made him possible. Epstein made his bet. Now it's time for us to show our hand. Thank you. That's what this time is all about. It's time for us collectively to respond to what this represents. And this is a glamorized celebrity version of everything we've been talking about since yesterday morning. So, like I said, this is all going somewhere. There is work specifically for you to do. But before we get there, we want to take some time to answer some questions and to speak to some of these things based on some feedback that we've gotten from you. So if we could have our guys come on up. And you've met Justin, you've met myself, JR. We have 3 other folks that are coming. And these are men that are a part of our community that have been doing work in this space for a long, long time. Some of them professionally, some of them volunteer. But this is Curtis Miller, my biker buddy of like 30-some years. And this is Isaac McKeithen, who, I don't know what to say about you. Phenomenal. And this is Gary Young. He looks kind. He's a badass. Just don't ask him about the blue apron. We had a long talk last night about his early years. So anyway, Justin, you want to?
Yep.
You got a mic.
Yeah,
okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Okay. So first of all, thank you all for the questions. There were some really good questions in there. This is going to be sort of half Q&A from your questions, and then we also have some sort of panel content. There were enough questions that we don't have time to get to all of them. So if you do not hear your question, my apologies for that. So the first question is, you showed us an IMB right here in our community. There's law enforcement in the room. We know what they're doing. Why don't they just get taken down? So in other words, isn't this a law enforcement problem? Why can't we just go get them? Probably a JR start there.
I'll talk for law enforcement. I wish it was as simple as that, and it's not for many reasons. One is what we've seen throughout this nation is taking them down, or however you want to define that, is a very short-term solution that actually may risk the safety of those involved in some ways, and also does not get to the people who benefit from it the way you would think. They are organized and thoughtful about how they tier their organization, and so that our experience is that these investigations are long-term. I think you heard that before. And if not, what happens is that business will be up in another place within the week. And those victims will just be moved to another location within the week. And so it's not as simple as just, I know, I almost mentioned that in my presentation. We're saying it's right here, we know what they're doing, But knowing what they're doing in sort of the context in this room and proving what they're doing in the context of a trial in court are two very separate things that we don't have enough time for. But one is just the idea of hearsay, right? The people who are involved in that are going to have to be the ones that testify in court regarding that. It can't be, I saw someone else's statements online that said X. That never comes into court. And so it's a much more complicated issue, and I know it looks like, why aren't we doing something about it? They're right here, and I get those same comments in all jurisdictions, but it can be much more complicated. People are working on the issue, but they're also working on sort of the systemic issues as far as like landlords and educating landlords on who they rent to, educating the organ massage businesses and the licensing. We talk a lot, they work with us to do that. Changing some of the legislation around that. There was a law last year that talks about operating without a license and making it a crime and a felony the second time in order to go after those individuals. So there's some work being done, but it's work being done that has a more permanent solution than just kicking them to the next strip mall down the street.
Yeah.
It also doesn't address demand. If we could wave a magic wand and eliminate all IMBs, but we don't do anything about a system that produces men who want to buy sex, then they're just going to buy it someplace else. They're going to find a way. We have to figure out how to deal with demand, or getting rid of IMBs is, I was going to say pointless, useless. Yeah.
I want to back up just one quick second. I know whenever I'm listening to a panel, it's really helpful for me when I have context for everybody's. So you've heard from JR and Tom and myself, and I actually thought it would be, I want to give you all a little bit of context for these three guys as well. So Curtis has been doing work for a really long time in suicide prevention and youth mental health development work. And several years ago, we got connected with work that he was doing in these sort of like pro workshops where people come and they're looking for active engagement with mental health and storytelling and cultivating belonging and all these things. And I said, hey, Curtis, could we, what do you think if we took your content and my platform where we talk to sex buyers in the act of trying to buy sex, and did your weekend workshops in like 90-second adversarial conversations? He's like, yeah, let's give it a try. And so we've spent the last several years trying to figure out how to merge those worlds where when you cultivate health, it would be fair to say that young people who have a deep sense of belonging are far less likely to harm themselves. So similarly, men who have a deep sense of belonging are much less likely to use buying sex as a way to deal with things. So that's the context that we've been working together. The platform that you've heard Tom and I talk about, where we talk to sex buyers at the point of purchase, Gary and Isaac have been finding and training and leading men within their Southern California communities. And they've each had probably hundreds of conversations with different sex buyers over the last several years doing demand reduction. So apologize for doing this a little bit out of order, but that's the context for what we're all up here for. Just before we move off of this question real quick, you mentioned, JR, harm to the people that are additional harm that could be caused by people who are in IMBs that are being harmed. Why would just going in and taking it down cause additional harm to the victims?
So in my experience, without sort of the infrastructure to help them move past that, like I said, they will just be moved. And sometimes it can be a worse position for those individuals, as well as, right, the police coming in, they're the sort of people there, right? So there's an investigation and a sting or whatever it is, and like Curtis talked about buyers, those are the ones we should focus on, and the people who are benefiting from that. But ultimately what happens is usually they're displaced first without a really coordinated effort and a way to go after the individuals that they're in debt to, or they're holding them, their paperwork and other things of that nature. So it's just not as simple as I think we would all like it to be.
Okay. I think that your presentation made an impression on JR because the next question is also a little bit law enforcement focused. So on YouTube, there are personas and groups that pose as underage girls or boys meeting a predator at a Walmart, a Target, etc. for sex, a sting operation. Do these individuals assist or make investigations more difficult to prosecute?
Tom wants to start. I'll let him start.
Just a little bit of the epic history. That's who we wanted to be when all of this started. Like we fancied ourselves as that, and so my original plan included flying drones over 82nd Avenue and confronting men coming out of strip clubs. Like I had a plan, and I remember I met with JR, and I think it was Mike Gallagher, the head of the sex trafficking unit at the time at Portland Police. Anyway, and so we started to unpack this, and they both looked at me like I had two heads. And what came out of that, though, is, and I think this has served us well for 13 plus years now, is it was JR that started. He goes, look, there's a line. And on one side is being an ally of law enforcement, which is something we always wanted to be. But you cross a line, and you become an agent of law enforcement, and with that comes all kinds of liability, and for people like JR and for the police that we were working with, all kinds of problems. And really it was JR for the next several years who was just dogmatic about keeping that line and knowing where that line is. So that's a reasonable question, and I understand the impulse of wanting to do that, but it's not as simple as that, so.
Yeah, I've dealt with cases with that exact scenario where I've received text messages and a video of someone being confronted who had been online chatting with someone who was not law enforcement. In my experience, it actually can really make an investigation harder, and in some ways, things have been done that we've had to dismiss investigations because of how it was handled. Also, in Oregon, in the law, it talks about being a law enforcement agent posing. So if you're not a law enforcement agent posing, then sometimes it actually is not a crime in some of those situations. So it can be really challenging. I understand why people feel frustrated or feel like they need to do it, but yes, everyone has their lanes to play, and I think for some of those things, in my experience, it's made it more difficult for law enforcement to do what they need to do and hold people accountable that need to be held accountable. On the other hand, I understand why people are like, I'm going to go be involved, and I think not enough's being done, but I would always refer to the experts who are law enforcement. There's a certain way to do it. There's a certain way to gather evidence, a chain of custody of evidence, that things needed to be done and said and collected, and many of those hover that line of being an agent of the state, which, as Tom said, applies, all those things that officers and are held accountable for then apply to those individuals who are trying to be agents of the state. So it's a complicated issue. I'm happy to talk to someone sort of offline so I don't waste everyone's time with a long drawn out, but there are some real challenges that it may make it harder than people realize.
Gary or Isaac, I'm thinking about, would you mind bringing me down just a little bit? Thank you. Gary or Isaac, I'm curious if, I know that we train in order to not present as sort of a vigilante kind of energy, but I'm wondering if that, as you guys have talked to buyers, does that bubble up, that idea of sort of vigilante, take matters into my own hands, kind of come up for you?
It does, and the challenge has not been reduced. And for myself, and I think most of the guys on my patrol, you hear some really dank, stark remarks right off the bat. A lot of our phone calls are preceded by texts. In fact, most of it is by text, and so, the freedom you have on a keyboard, boy, these narcissistic gentlemen, I'll use that loosely, but these narcissistic guys with all those 30 elements working in their heads that JR was sharing. They all pop out readily in their texts. So you already are kind of, getting this, okay, where's my baseball bat sort of feeling going on. And, but then the phone rings and you realize, just like JR talked about, we have to have a method. Otherwise it's all out the window, right? So we have to take a breath and we have to assume a posture of empathy and not shame. And we all want accountability in every part of every walk of our lives. So I guess I look at it, my job in that moment, as making the accountability, placing that accountability upon myself to just sort of align what's coming at me. And so, as a firefighter, going out to whatever 911 brings you that day, you don't know what you're in for. That's what you have to do. You have to take a big breath, step back for a second, sort of align it to where you can tackle it one step at a time. And so that's how the conversations go. But it definitely starts with assuming the right posture and having that curiosity that I think we were invited to assume yesterday, right before we started, right? I need to have that when I accept a phone call from a buyer. Like, just be curious about what brings them here, and we have a lot of intel that we can look at, and we can kind of see if the guy's being straight with us, and I can say, what brings you here tonight? Why this phone call tonight? You ever done this before? Things like that, just to get a conversation going and sort of put things on an even keel, and it helps me just as much as it helps him, which helps the overall conversation, which helps the overall cause, because we can't help somebody if they're just going to hang up, right? So I can sort of look at my intel and have this conversation and decide, yeah, all right, well, you say it's your first time. There's 15 other attempts showing up in the last couple weeks. It tells me a little something about him, but it helps me have a safer approach. And so that's what it's all about, is just choosing the approach, making sure that my body posture, my voice, if I'm in person with it, we should be talking about all this stuff in context of our own lives, right? Not just a patrol one night a week. How we live our lives, right? When we talked about how important body positioning is with talking to a person is, how we can intimidate and we can send messages. And we have to remember that comes out through our voice, through the way we talk. And
so you're saying, like, you can relate to the idea of picking up your baseball bat, but you've got a process for getting yourself aligned,
right,
to not coming at them like a kid dressed up as Batman meeting a predator in Walmart.
Or Albertsons.
Like, that's, yeah. Yeah. That is a real thing. You can actually, and this may have been the person who wrote this question, you can see that you can find, it's often young 20s men who will dress up as a superhero, Batman, Superman, what have you, and they'll meet usually males that are looking to purchase younger males. They'll meet them at like a Burger King or a whatever, and they just walk in with their costumes and cameras rolling, and chaos ensues. Yeah. Isaac, did you want to add anything to that?
Well, for me, it's remembering I'm a guy. I'm a problem. I'm no different than they are. At the end of the day, 6 degrees, that's all that separates us. one bad decision. I could be the same guy. I can be that buyer. I could be that trafficker. That's all I think about. And that's what I try and get my guys to think about. We are no better than them. Period. If you think you are, you cannot be one of my volunteers. Because we're not up here. We're down here in the trenches with plain and simple.
Okay, next question. This isn't a what about question to defer responsibility, but I keep hearing women say sex work is real work. How do we fight against that, or what effect is that having on the cause? It seems like the type of men we're talking about, buyers, would use that as permission. Well, that's an easy one.
It's a great question.
Yeah, it is a very, very good question. No, I think you should. It's difficult to talk about the topic of sex work as work as somebody who has not experienced being sexually exploited. There's one part of me that cares deeply about being thoughtful and to people's experiences, people's backgrounds that may have brought them to certain decisions that they're making in their lives. And on the other hand, at the end of the day, the impact of the trauma and abuse, and like the story that Tom told about Jewel earlier, are so impactful and so much more the standard that to start to slowly erode the importance of ending the harm and trauma of trafficking, it starts to like slowly cook in this, well, what about this? And what about this? And it's this slow reduction of boundaries and truth around what the real experience is. And you start applying these sort of cultural nuances around people's individual experience, and then that being extrapolated out to, so that's what the entire sexual exploitation market looks like. It's on one hand, it's a complicated and nuanced and sensitive topic, and on the other hand, it's really clear that people with lived experience have said again and again and again and again when they were in the life that there were all sorts of ways to make it make sense. And defining it as work is a way to make it make sense. So all of those books that have been provided as options, those are going to speak with so much more authority than I can on what the real experience looks like. But I have been emboldened by so many survivors just saying with unapologetically that sex work is not work. And so while it can feel perhaps a little uncomfortable to say it with such unapologeticness, I just would say defer to the people who have the lived experiences. Just say sex work is not work. And so it has this frog in the slow boiling pot impact of slowly starting to give people this sense of what was it you were saying, Tom, about like how we learn to like what we can ignore, what we can get kind of used to. We start getting used to like, well, let's kind of unpack all the nuances of every little conversation. Before you knew it, you're not having really clear, distinct conversations based on data and the overwhelmingly massive collection of stories of people who have had lived experience telling you exactly how it is. And now we're caught up in these nuanced stories, and that erodes our ability to be effective. Anybody else?
I want to speak to the excuse part that the men might be making and what's going on in their psyche. I'm not really interested primarily in influencing systems and supporting men and women into not doing bad things. I want to see a community of people that's thriving, and buying sex doesn't fit into that. Sex is great. We should be having it in healthy ways. Men should be pursuing healthy relationships. Men should be pursuing healthy individuality. They should be wanting more for themselves than situations where they have to make excuses at all. This is a thing that's part of human thriving, and I think that's what we need to be shooting for. So if I'm talking to a guy who's trying to argue their way into justifying buying sex, we're talking about the wrong thing. That's not what it means to be a healthy human being. Let's look at what it means to be a healthy human being, work on that, and then the issue of buying sex falls away. It just isn't part of the situation.
Anybody else? Okay. Give me 3 examples of real actions a regular citizen can take to help in this cause. I feel like people are going to think, oh, they paid this person to write this question. I promise you, this was not a plant. Give me 3 examples of real actions a regular citizen can take to help in this cause. Other than mindfulness, is the only real option to volunteer time at one of these organizations? What can I tell my friends who want to get involved?
This might sound a little bit like a non-answer to that question, but it is intimately connected in response to what can people do. What can people do? I think one of the things, and this doesn't get enough consideration yet, but look at where the boys are. Look at where the boys are being formed and make investment there. And it doesn't necessarily have to be like, okay, we're going to teach you how not to become a sex buyer, but to Curtis's point, we want to teach you what to aspire to as a young man so that when you're a full-grown man, you're thriving. And so it's youth sport coaches, youth leaders, teachers, coaches, that sort of a thing. That's where some of the most important work needs to happen. And I want those people, especially those men that are influencing young boys, to recognize and hear from me and from the people doing this kind of work that what they do really, really matters. Even if they don't ever know anything about what sexual exploitation, they don't learn all the nuances that we've been talking about, just investing in building young men with character and to see those young guys thriving, like that's where the real work is. So that would be one thing. I only did one. The question asked for 3, so.
So this is going to be to all the men in here, because the ladies get it, and we do it when ladies are in the room. But men, that conversation that we have of what we going to do after the staff meeting, what we going to do after this conference, you know that conversation I'm talking about. Where are we going? I need you to be the man that says, oh, wow, let me tell you the truth about what happens. We learned about IBMs today. Tell them the truth about what happens, and tell them the truth about what happens on the street, what happens in the strip club. And you'll be amazed at how that conversation now changes. You'll be amazed that now when you walk in the room, everybody's like, oh, let's think about this. You just learned about human trafficking. You just learned about sex trafficking and labor trafficking. You have a network. Now it's time to actually use that network and share it. Every single conversation I have, even with my family, my brother, he will tell you, he's a single 45-year-old man, and I'm his biggest headache. Because every single time he says, I'm going to the Dominican Republic, I tell him, yep, and this is what you're going down there to contribute to. He's like, you know, you messing up my buzz. I say, exactly. That's the goal. So men, let's mess up the buzz. Let's bust the bubble. Let's be that discouragement.
Yeah.
One of the things that comes up a lot in conversations about trafficking, especially when we talk about educating and healing men, is the question, what about accountability? And I'm a huge fan of accountability, and there's lots of different ways to do that. But one of the ways that men in particular need to learn how to hold each other accountable is not about stop doing bad things. We need to hold each other accountable to being who we actually are and contributing the purpose that is contained within us uniquely. Each individual has a unique purpose to offer the world. And we have to know each other to know what that is. And we need to be able to hold each other accountable to being and doing what it is that we are and what we have to do in the world. And that means we got to care for each other in practical ways that meet each other's needs so we have the resources and the energy to do the stuff that's generative in the world. If we hold each other accountable to that and say the things that we see in each other that lift each other up, then we're making a positive difference instead of just not doing the negative thing. And the more energy we can put into the positive, the less there is to go into the negative.
The person that wrote that question, the person that wrote that question speaks to my heart. There's a real practicality behind it. So can you translate everything that you just said into just a such as, something really specific? I think it is.
Tom and Justin in particular do this for me. They know my identity, they know my purpose, and they know what I need. And so when we are together, I receive that kind of accountability from them in the context of our relationships. And when I have bad days, I will call or I will go on a ride with Tom and I will ask to be reminded of who I am and that it's pretty powerful that what I have to offer the world counts. So I lean on these guys and I expect them to lean on me. And I want to be lifted up. I don't want to be reminded of the stuff that's broken in me all the time. We're working on it constantly. But I want to rely on my friends, and I want all of us to have each other to rely on. And so the real practical stuff is say the things. Ask the questions. Don't use like get really specific, really precise when you tell somebody who you think they are and what they have to offer the world. Be exacting in that. The closer you can get to that like deep uniqueness, the more powerful what you're going to pull out of that other person is and what you can share. And it's freaking cool when you can get there. It's really cool. And then talk about dealing with mental, emotional, and behavioral illness. That kind of stuff is the best medicine.
Yeah. I'm just going to press one more little bit of effort on that. Can you raise your hand if you are an organization that offers sort of programs or opportunities that if you had, well, this question was more generic, but I'll sort of stick with the theme of demand. If you have a program that if men were meaningfully involved in it with some level of commitment for the purpose of knowing that it contributes to either short-term, medium-term, or long-term reduction of demand or brings an energy towards anti-trafficking or helping people in some way related to the issue that we've been talking about today? Can you just raise your hand? So whoever wrote that question, each of these people, I bet, has 3 different answers. So that's probably about 50 different answers of the specific ways that people can practically get involved. One more hand-raising question thing. Curtis and I have, we do a lot of this sort of conversation at the sort of high level and what does it all mean, double rainbow kind of stuff, a lot. And what we've realized is when you see a guy tell a story of a thing that's a little bit vulnerable and then you watch him not receive judgment, receive a little bit of curiosity, and receive some of that articulation back to like, yeah, but I know this about you. It's as Curtis said, it's really powerful. So we've just decided to start organizing that. And we're creating groups of men who don't want to just stop a thing. They want more than what is offered for men who were told to go to the Dominican Republic and go play, go get your buzz on, or make a whole bunch of money, or all of the narrow sliver of humanity that men are told to live and to be measured by. They're tired of it. They want more. They want the real thing. But how do you do that when you've lived several decades without being taught how to do it? It's pretty wild. And so what we are finding is that a lot of guys want it, and they're willing to pay for it. They're willing to commit to it and spend time on it. So I would just say that's a very practical thing you can do. Find a couple of buddies and start a thing. Hey guys, every Tuesday night we're going to get together. And don't make it like we're just going to play poker. Play poker! And tell stories, ask questions, say specific things. And if you want any help in doing that, come talk to us.
So we're going to move on to talk to you guys a little bit about the National Survivor Study that was done. And then I'm joined today by Amanda, and I'm going to have Amanda introduce herself here in a second. But we want to talk to you guys about a little bit more of what the data is showing about survivors who have managed to escape and what does their life look like now. And then we're going to talk a little bit more, again, about our emergency funds for survivors to fill that gap. And so, Amanda, welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you for being up here with me. So,
Thank you for
Amanda joined our team at Disruptors.org last fall.
Yes.
And some of you have met her because she's been in town a couple of times. She's from Idaho. She's been in town a couple of times for us to come out and meet community members. So we got to meet the Central Point PD together and the Ashland PD. And anyway, she's been a big help on helping us fill this room this year. So thank you, Amanda.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, and thank you guys for having me. Thank you, Lauren, for bringing me on as part of your team. So I'm one of the co-directors of development for Disruptors.org that Lauren brought on, like she said, last fall, I guess end of summer last fall. So I'm excited to be here, and hopefully I will continue to meet more community members as I come back over. Like Lauren said, I live in Idaho, so I travel over about 7 hours away by drive. This time I flew, so it was a lot. Well, it still wasn't that much faster. But there's no direct flights from Boise, Idaho, which is hilarious to me. But yeah, so I handle, I work with Lauren on the summit. I've worked with Lauren on setting up donor platforms and working with different agencies and organizations on getting the word out about Disruptors.org and talking about the emergency funds and what we do, and also grant writing. So again, thank you for having me, and look forward to talking more about this.
Thank you.
Bringing
All
the
right.
awareness.
So today we're going to talk about the National Survivor Study. So this was a study that was done by Polaris Project, and if you're familiar with the anti-trafficking hotline, for years now it had been run by the Polaris Project. So we sort of consider them like one of the largest data collectors on human trafficking in the country, because they were getting the calls in directly to their site. And they did this study a couple of years ago called In Harm's Way, to really try to get a pulse on some of the things that we've been discussing. When a survivor is able to exit the life, what does life actually look like? And so in this survey, it was peer-reviewed, published, They were able to survey 457 survivors across the country. So a couple of notes about that. All of the participants were compensated for their time, and the participants self-identified as survivors by answering a series of questions that align with sex and labor trafficking definitions. So they're self-identifying as survivors. A couple of key survey data points that this survey wanted to address was, what were the vulnerabilities that led to the trafficking situation? What is the income and employment after exiting the life? And what did availability of services and support look like for them now? So a couple of things arose when they asked those questions about prior vulnerabilities before trafficking. 83% had experienced poverty before. 69% of them had run away from home. 96% had experienced abuse, physical, sexual, or emotional, in their home. 93% had experienced substance abuse and mental health challenges. 93% had lived with someone who experienced substance abuse or mental health challenges. And 96% had other family and household instability. That doesn't make sense. I clearly copy-pasted something wrong. But what we're seeing here is that there's a high rate of vulnerabilities. And so we've talked quite a bit about vulnerabilities over the last 2 days, discussing about how people come to be trafficked, what happens. And so we're seeing that they already came with a lot of vulnerabilities, and we're seeing it across the board. When they asked about services, 75% said at the time of exit they needed extra support accessing behavioral or mental health services with providers that understood trauma. And trafficking trauma is distinct. It is different than domestic violence. It is different than child abuse. And so having service providers who are trauma-informed is a big need, and 75% of respondents said that that was difficult. For the economics of a situation after exiting the life of trafficking, 43% were making under $25,000 per year, compared to 26% of the general U.S. population. So we're seeing high numbers of survivors living under the poverty line at rates that are much higher than just average citizens. We also learned a lot about financial abuse. So one of the many ways victims of human trafficking are exploited is through the misuse of their identity by their trafficker for various financial schemes. So we have identity theft. We have a lot of debt racked up in their name. We have situations where they might even be prosecuted because the books were in their names. And so financial abuse is a real thing for survivors. Also, they were exploited for money. And so when they come out of the life and they try to rebuild, they have this added stress of the trauma from being financially abused, poor credit, right? They have all of these additional issues that lead to a lot of struggles along the way. More than 60% of respondents reported experiencing financial abuse by their traffickers. So this is very common. I've also heard, like Rebecca Bender, say that her relationship, she was a survivor, right? Her relationship to money is also skewed because it also is not just money, it's also added to your self-worth of what, like, your worth. And you have been sold for this amount of dollars, so just your financial blueprint is just turned upside down, and they're dealing with things related to money that most of us never even have to consider. The other thing that's important to notice is that they really experience a lack of access. So respondents were 2 times as likely to be unbanked compared to the general U.S. population. So imagine escaping something as harrowing as human trafficking, trying to rebuild your life, and you don't even have a bank account. How do you operate in this world where everything is like, I can't imagine not having access to credit or to savings or to even be able to swipe a debit card. Everything is going through cash. Like, just the stress alone makes me sweat, on top of imagining everything else that they have to deal with. So there's a real issue with lack of access. And so ultimately, the study found that respondents are surviving, they're not thriving. This is a real problem when we look at people who are trying to rebuild their life and who are trying every single day not to end up back where they were. If they finally were able to escape, the power and what that means is just constantly overshadowed by, will I have to go back? because I don't have a bank account and I don't have any credit. And so this is why we're seeing so many people struggling financially after escaping a life of trafficking. It's not just escape, rescue, great, have a happy life. There's a lot of things that come with this. And so I'm going to turn it over to Amanda, because now that we've sort of painted a picture of what this really looks like with the data, I know we've told a lot of stories these last 2 days, but now we have seen some data behind it. So Amanda's going to talk to us a little bit about the emergency funds for survivors.
Thank you, Lauren. I appreciate that. So with that, and the reason for that data, we have Disruptors Org has created the Emergency Funds for Survivor program. And I know you heard a little bit about it yesterday when Zoe and Lauren were up on stage talking about it, but we're going to go a little bit more in depth today on it. And this Emergency Funds for Survivors program is definitely built to fill in the gaps. It's a nationwide program that we have created. And with that nationwide program, we actually have ambassadors that are survivors, but lived experience survivors and ambassadors that are across the country. So they actually work with survivors in their organizations, and they are able to refer them to us, or if they are a fit, they will have them fill out an application or a form for us, so we are aware of their need. This program, we offer a cash amount of up to $300 to that survivor. And our goals that we set for this program were one survivor per week that we could help. So that's $300 per week that we can offer to that survivor, and be able to give them that money to fill in that gap for several different types of needs. However, we are seeing increased numbers. So between the months of March and April, we have had 24 emergency requests. I'm sure you can all figure that out. That's 3 times the amount of what we set our goal for. So we are continuing to see survivors' needs come more and more often. So because of this, we currently have some requests in our queue that I'm going to kind of let you guys see here up on the screen, and we're going to read together. So these are the ones that are currently in our queue right now. And you can look at the dates. We usually try to help survivors out with the $300 amount of money immediately, like an immediate day. That same day, we try to get them that money, so because it is an emergency need, they need the funds right away. You can see from the dates on here, this first one is April 25th. And it reads, I am currently unable to drive due to a vascular issue in my legs. I drive a standard and need to use my left leg for the clutch. And with the issue I'm dealing with, I cannot do that this time. I will need to either Uber or pay friends or family for gas. Okay, that's on April 25th. That need is still in our queue. Second one, April 30th. Hello. So my trafficker recently just got arrested 2 months ago. I was homeless, living in a shelter, but now I have found a room to rent. I was just trying to see if I can get some money to get some groceries and toiletries. The third one is from May 2nd. I received a ticket on my way to work a few months ago, and it slipped my mind after. It is now due on May 16th, and I just paid all my bills. I don't have the money to pay it. And number 4 that we currently still have in our queue is May 6th. So this one just came in 2 days ago. I am disabled due to a traumatic brain injuries and spine damage from my trafficking experience, which has affected my vision, and I am no longer able to drive. I have medical appointments and need to Uber. I do not have anyone to help me and no public transportation where I live. I've been applying relentlessly, but I am having a hard time right now. So I know all of us sometimes, $300 is $300, but to several of us in this room, or a lot of us in this room, that's not a huge amount of money, right? But to these survivors, it is a huge amount of money, and it covers a lot of needs. So emergencies don't wait. These survivors, they have emergencies every single day. They don't wait, and they shouldn't have to either. Our survivors should not. So yesterday we showed a video, and there was a couple people that have come up to us and said they couldn't quite hear it. I just think it's really good that we show that video again, so we're going to go ahead and play the video that Lauren played yesterday when her and Zoe were up on stage, so you guys can listen to it one more time.
I met my trafficker when I was in high school. He was 1 year older than me, and he lured me out of high school my senior year. I was sold online, and I was trafficked over the course of a year, just right there in my community, 12 minutes from the school I went to. When I got away, I moved back home, and I felt lost. It was Now what?
I'm a trafficking survivor, and I was trafficked for 20 years, beginning when I was a minor. Escaping was very hard. I did have a lot of support when I first left, but once I left the safe house, I felt very isolated. When I left, my trafficker filed for custody of my 2 children, and I've had to deal with him in family court for the last 8 years trying to protect my children.
When a survivor of human trafficking is able to escape, that doesn't mean that the problem's in there. Survivors deal with complex PTSD, a host of medical issues. Sometimes they're battling custody issues as well. They have gaps in job history, and the trauma continues on.
You know, you exit the life of trafficking and you don't right away just go into a financial stable situation. So you do need that support, whether it's a vehicle or, you know, if you say you do get a job but I don't have a way to get there, or I have children that I need support paying for their childcare so I can work.
I've had to hire an attorney, and my legal fees have been insurmountable for me.
This is why we started the Emergency Funds Program. This program exists to fill the gap between escape and rebuilding a life.
Being connected to an organization like Disruptors.org would have helped me with financial security, economic stability.
Once you leave a safe house and you're on your own, it's very challenging and very scary. Disruptors.org helped me by donating from their emergency fund towards my legal fees, which was a huge help.
It's more than financial aid. It's immediate support that survivors can lean on. Within hours, they can access funds to get enough groceries to fill the fridge, to get brand new eyeglasses so they can see, to get their car repaired so that they can drive to work. In one instance, we were even able to provide a bed for a survivor who had finally secured safe housing but had been sleeping on a yoga mat for months.
It was frustrating to see even organizations sometimes turn victims down, and it creates that very same vulnerability that the victim had that made them vulnerable to be trafficked.
As an ambassador with Disruptors.org, my job is to connect survivors to the emergency fund. I work with countless survivors across the nation, and this emergency fund can mean the difference between rebuilding and re-exploitation.
And that is why we're inviting you to become a monthly disruptor. Your monthly donation ensures that the funds are available for survivors when they need them, not 6 months from now, not a year from now, but today.
As a monthly disruptor, it gives me great comfort knowing that my donation is going directly to a survivor and is helping with an immediate need. The emergency fund ensures that survivors have access to medical care and mental health services. When survivors are short on their rent, it leads to their entire families being displaced from their homes. I'm kept well informed on the needs that are being met, and I'm also invited to attend meetings to hear directly from survivors and know the impact that this is having. I also just love being a part of this community that's making a measurable difference.
There are so many survivors out there who need our support.
It's meaningful to me knowing that what I would spend on a couple coffees a month actually provides a lifeline to a survivor. Your donation can make a real difference in the life of a survivor.
It's critical that we have places like Disruptors.org that can meet these emergency needs. As a donor, you can fill that gap between escape and rebuilding a life.
Become a monthly disruptor. Become a monthly disruptor.
Become a monthly disruptor.
Become a monthly disruptor.
Become a monthly disruptor and ensure that a survivor has access to funds now.
I know they did such a great job on that video. I love it. So I do want to point out Ashley on that video, one of our ambassadors. She was here yesterday, but she really pointed out something great on that, where that monthly amount of money, again, $300, can make that decision for a survivor to decide to go back into the life. And that is the case for many. So we do see that. I've seen it in organizations I was with prior. Lauren and I were just talking about that previously. Sometimes, obviously, a lot of them don't want to go back into the life, but that is a choice sometimes, because that need for that money for their kids, for food, for rent, for those things, that's a decision they have to make. and we don't want them to have to make that decision. So we are asking you today to become a monthly disruptor. And in these next slides, I'm going to show you some of the things that the funds can go to that you are donating to. So even as little as $12 a month provides essential hygiene and dignity items for a survivor rebuilding stability. Okay, that's just $12 a month on ongoing, reoccurring giving. $25 a month provides a week of groceries for a survivor rebuilding stability and feeding their children. Okay, a lot of survivors that we work with do have kids. Up to $50 a month provides reliable transportation so the survivor can get to work, court, or critical appointments. You saw that on one of the requests, some of the doctor's appointments that they have that they can't drive, but they need to get an Uber or pay somebody for gas. And then $100 a month provides one safe night in a hotel when a home is no longer available, or safe shelter, so they can provide and pay for a hotel. So those are very, basic things that we sometimes don't think about, that we have easily accessible to us, but they do not. So those amounts of money can provide a lot for a survivor of trafficking. So we are asking you today to take a look at this, and if it's tugging on your heartstrings, definitely become a monthly disruptor with us. And this is a QR code that you can sign up directly here. There's one on our table, on table 1. If you have additional questions or want to know more, Lauren and I will be available, or the individuals at table 1 also as well. So thank you guys so much for taking the time to listen to us.
Do the next slide. Can you click to the next slide? Thanks. All right, and so we have one more thing happening during this session, and we did want to bring one of our ambassadors up. Jay has been instrumental in connecting survivors to the fund and making sure that people have access to these funds, and Jay has something planned for us. So if you were here last year, you will remember that Jay was our keynote speaker, and Jay did such a phenomenal job, and she does so much in the survivor community and under the umbrella of the Sex Trade Survivor Caucus, and she has something planned for you all.
Thank you. Hello. Hello, everyone. My name is Jay Benke. I'm a child abduction and sex trafficking survivor. And part of being public with my survivorship has opened many doors for me. As you've heard from other folks up here, being survivor-led and survivor-informed is the gold standard. So that means that I've been able to work as an intelligence analyst and work on operations, find missing kids, be involved in prosecuting traffickers. I get to serve in all sorts of really cool advisory spaces. I know it sounds like I'm bragging a lot, but really those doors have been opened for me, and those opportunities, because I am able to be public as a survivor. But being public as a survivor comes at a cost. There are many risks to being public. It impacts our families. It impacts the way that we're able to show up in community. There can be a lot of judgment, and it can be really challenging. But it can also risk people's lives. There is a huge risk to this, and there are many reasons why people cannot come forward and be public as a survivor. Nearly every space that I speak in, somebody will approach me privately and let me know that they too are a survivor, but they cannot share that information, which means that they are here doing the work, they're in the trenches, and they're not getting recognized. So when I come off the stage, I get told things like, I'm so brave, and I'm so incredible, and I'm so good looking, and you guys can feel free to say those types of things more. I like it. But my fellow siblings who are not public do not get those accolades. They are really the unsung heroes in this work. And so I would love for you all to join me in recognizing these folks and giving a standing ovation to our fellow survivors in this space and in this work who are doing this work for us. We see you and we love you.
Let's do this.
Okay, thank you guys. We are number 1.
Disruptors.org. I think you guys have heard about us and what our needs are. You just heard me on stage saying what our needs are for our monthly disruptors. So we are asking for monthly disruptors, for you to be a recurring donor with us. And what we're also asking is that those 4 needs that I read off, that at least 1, if not all 4, get filled today before we leave, so we can help those survivors get off our waiting list, so we can fulfill those needs. So that is what we are about and what we want. So please let me know if you have any questions.
I would love for 1 or 2 men in this room to start a men's group. That's it.
All right, so I am the National Engagement Specialist for the Sex Trade Survivor Caucus. We are an all-survivor organization that creates space for survivors to impact change in policy and legislation. Any legislation that we are trying to pass or defeat is really reliant on survivors being present and informing the space. In order to do that, we have to be able to fund our work in many other ways. So that Sex Trade Survivor Caucus trains our members to become Roadmaps facilitators. Roadmaps is a one-of-a-kind simulation training. And so this is a pathway for continued revenue for our members. So what we are asking for is for 3 donors to sponsor 3 survivors total, for us to ship this kit. This big, bulky 16-pound kit costs roughly $150 to ship out. So if somebody could support our folks, we'd greatly appreciate that.
Janai Grandma Boom Mestrovich, Super Kid Power, nonprofit tax exempt, 501c3. Been doing work for preventing children from having problems later, starting at the age of 3 for 50 years. I do it in a fun, experiential, tactile way, and I also help poverty, single moms who are really struggling, and I help homeless. Example, this week I have fed 27 people at the camp, the homeless camp, breakfast, 40 people at the Sunday morning breakfast at the library, taught 27 migrant and lower income children social emotional learning and stress management, and I helped a woman who was raped by 4 men who she didn't know, got pregnant, had a heart attack, just had a preemie baby, and getting her clothes and things to help, and helped a man who had athlete's foot at the camp to heal his feet that were rotting. What I need, money, networking, to be on stage and educate and inspire more, and help in making networking connections. And my time's about up. I'm going to finish ahead of time. Okay, thank you very much.
Hello, I'm Neff with CASA of Jackson County. CASA stands for Court Appointed Special Advocate. CASAs are the voices in court for abused and neglected children. We have 130 kiddos on our wait list, and we are asking for volunteers. We're also asking for food or department store gift cards from Target, Fred Meyer, Wingo, or Food for Less. Thank you.
Hi everyone, my name is Nicole Ritterbusch. I'm the Housing and Outreach Supervisor with Maslow Project, and this is
I'm Casey Stein, I'm a case manager with Maslow Project.
And I want to thank everyone for being here, and thank you to all the amazing presenters and for everyone's support. And I just want to say that Maslow Project is a local nonprofit. We serve Josephine and Jackson counties, and we serve youth ages 24 and younger and families with children and pregnant individuals who are experiencing homelessness or are at risk of homelessness. We provide support to them by providing basic needs, MKV rights, education, life skills classes, housing navigation, building self-sufficiency, walking alongside them through positive youth development and case management. Our ask of support is listed on the screen. You can do that in many different ways by providing donations of food, hygiene, Also, we're in a capital campaign right now, and also one-time donations, or just by getting our newsletter. That would be helpful also. And you can stop by our booth, number 6, to ask more questions and meet us, and that would be greatly appreciated. Thank you.
Hi everyone, my name is Lisa with 715, and this is Melissa, our teen parent coordinator. But I have a question for you. Do you know young people these days are struggling more than ever with loneliness, anxiety, unstable homes, and a lack of hope? Well, if you don't know the answer, it is yes. And at 715, we help with that. We're a nonprofit organization serving Jackson and Josephine County, and we have 15 different programs that help youth from elementary school up until 24. We have mentoring, youth clubs, vocational training, teen mom support, and juvenile justice outreach. And through that, we help young people build trusting relationships, confidence, and hope for their future. We are looking for volunteers, mentors, event participants, and sponsors. And when you partner with 715 in one of those ways, you are transforming the life of a kid who needs it most. Not only are you sharing a meal with a VOTEC student who learned valuable trade skills, but they are discovering what it feels like to sit around at a table with people who care about them. You are also helping a teen mom create a better future for their baby. You are providing a safe space for a student to feel friendship, acceptance, and community when she only felt like an outcast. See us at Booth 7 for more. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Nice to be here with you all. My name is Ava DeRosier. I'm with Jackson County Sexual Assault Response Team. For 22 years, we've been providing specialized medical care in both Jackson and Josephine County for sexual assault survivors. We have a team of specially trained forensic nurses that respond for free, 24 hours a day for ages 15 and up. And as of 2025, we expanded the program to also respond to strangulation and domestic violence. So it's a really important resource in our community. Come to our booth to learn more. We'd really love to make sure you have that information. We also have confidential advocates as well as a resource specialist that work alongside survivors to help connect them to the supports that they need. A big shout out to Erin Carr and Susan Moen for being just amazing. So, and then we also have a kindergarten through 12th grade prevention education program. We need more prevention in our community. We would love to talk with you all about that if you have interest in doing more prevention. And then some of the needs that we have, survivors in our community are having more difficulty accessing basic needs supports and emergency supports. So any resources in that regard would be helpful to us. We're looking for volunteers who have fundraising experience. And then if you have a group that you would be willing to connect us to so that we could work together to build some community prevention initiatives, we would love that opportunity. And thank you so much to all the speakers and educators. I'm very grateful for what you've taught all of us. Thank you.
My name is Kathleen Barnett. Everybody calls me Kathy. I belong to Seroptimist International of Medford, and we are a service organization that caters to women and girls. One of our biggest things we do is we give out a scholarship to a woman who has gone back to school and is the head of a household, so that she can continue her schooling and the money does not have to be spent on school. It can be spent to buy a computer, fix a car, get an apartment. And this is our main goal. Thank you.
My name is Morel Wyeth. I'm a licensed prayer practitioner at the Center for Spiritual Living /Unity in Medford. We're an open and diverse spiritual community recognizing the divine in everyone. We're committed to individual and collective transformation based on the teachings and principles of science of mind and new thought, which you can actually look up and find out what they are. Google is good for that. We embrace the global heart vision, a world that works for everyone, where forgiveness, compassion, nonviolence, respect, appreciation of beauty, and the generous sharing of resources is the norm. Our list of needs is our community's growing, which is awesome. We need a larger space where we can expand our service, education, outreach, and healing programs. We're looking for connections with community leaders, like everybody here, donors and organizations who value collaboration and transformation. We welcome opportunities to partner in efforts that restore dignity and create lasting change. Together, we can make a greater difference than any one organization alone. Let's all unite. Thank you.
Okay, hello again. Jordan Pease, I'm the founder and director of Rogue Valley Metaphysical Library here in Ashland. We're also co-sponsors of the conference here today. And our library is just 1 mile down Ashland Street from here. We close at 6 o'clock tonight, so hint, hint, visit if you still have any energy left. The needs we have are, I tell people the simplest way to support RVML, 25 years doing the library services, by the way, is just to spread the word. Tell your friends that we're existing there. Everything in our lending library, media exchange, and bookshop are donated by the Ashland community. And again, I always emphasize, after 25 years, a community of a population of 22,000 people keeps bringing us truckloads of books that we just end up stirring right back into the community. So it's such a great, beautiful win-win. It's also books on all subjects, not just spirituality and metaphysics. Boy, this is one that you can help all these organizations. It just takes a few minutes to write a Google review. Really simple to do that. Really does help a lot, too. And then our YouTube channel, we've been producing our Tuesday lecture series for approximately 20 years. So I've lost count, there must be 1,000 lectures there. So all free, they're all commercial free. Please take a look, like, share, subscribe. Thank you again for all being here.
Nobody should ever give me a microphone. But Tony Mendenhall with Hearts of the Mission, my coworker Shelley here. Hearts of the Mission's now in 6 counties. Locally in Jackson and Josephine County, we have a 15-bed youth shelter for runaway homeless youth, ages 10 to 17. We operate 2 transitional living programs, one in Jackson, one in Josephine. Between the 2, we have 15 beds for 18 to 21-year-olds. We contract with DHS to serve youth in foster care to prepare them for adulthood. Imagine that. Many of them aren't ready for that. And so we work with those kids and resource families to get those kids ready for independence. We have a Safe Families for Children program, which is all volunteer. It includes voluntary host homes for kids, for youth, for young adults. Mentors, we rely heavily on mentors and what we call a circle of support that comes around perhaps a hosting with a mentor for mom, dad, mentor for the kid, and support for host families. Our newest program is called Hearts for Seniors, which is in all 6 counties that we operate. It is a companion care program. We just happen to learn that there's a lot of seniors out there who are lonely and isolated. You probably all know that. Primarily we're a youth and family in crisis program, preventing kids from child welfare, preventing families from entering child welfare, and then also supporting those kids that do end up in the child welfare system. I heard something yesterday about protective factors. We really believe that kids particularly need that one healthy, dependable adult in their life. Most kids that come to us have zero dependable, trustworthy adults in their life. So what's our biggest need is mentors and volunteers and people to step up and say, yeah, I'll be that for a kid. Super important. So thank you.
Hi, everyone. My name is Erin Martin Fournier. I use she, her pronouns, and I am the Director of Advocacy Services with Community Works. We're the leading agency here in Jackson County for survivor victims of domestic violence, sexual assault, stalking, and human trafficking, both labor and sex trafficking. We do that through a variety of ways. We have free, confidential, privileged advocates throughout our systems here, like DHS, Child Welfare, Self-Sufficiency, and law enforcement agencies. Also, we run the Dunn House shelter, and we also have transitional housing units for survivors to be able to live 6 months to 2 years, low or free rent, and get support in accessing education and income. That's what we do. We serve all of Jackson County. We also run the 24-hour, 24/7 helpline for anyone to call for any needs, whether that's fleeing violence or just being lonely and needing someone to talk to. Our ask today is when people come into our Dunn House shelter and also move into our transitional housing, they often are fleeing violence with just the clothes on their back. Them and their children have to leave everything behind so they can stay alive to seek safety. On our website, we have an Amazon wish list that we keep updated for all of the needs. We provide all of their needs when they come into our shelter. We provide them clothes, basic hygiene products, food, and then when they move into if they move into one of our transitional housing, or if we help them with rental assistance moving into their own independent housing, we provide them heartwarming baskets for those things that we need, to create a basic home life. So dishes, towels, things that a lot of us take for granted. So please go to our website and click on our wish list and give anything that you can to let survivors know that you stand behind them. Thank you.
Right. Well, hi, I'm Joan Lamont, and I am the president of the Seroptimus International of Ashland. And my sister, where did she go? Kathy has already talked. There she is. And I hope I won't repeat some of the things she said. Well, so Seroptimus International of Ashland, we are celebrating our 80th year this year. We've been helping women and girls in Ashland, Phoenix, and Talent through educational scholarships. Seroptimus is a worldwide organization. We have 4 seats at the UN. We're heavily involved in combating sex trafficking, and it's one of our primary global initiatives. This coming Monday, we will be presenting 14 scholarships at our awards ceremony. Plus, we will give 5 Live Your Dream Awards to women of single households who are returning to school or who are already enrolled. We give money to various local charities that empower women and girls through education. Our main funding comes from our pillow and blanket rental booth at the Oregon Shakespeare Festival. We have partnered with OSF since 1949, and half of the money we get for that goes back to OSF and their program that they have, the fair, it used to be the FAIR program. We strive to eradicate the conditions that allow trafficking to thrive through education and supporting women and girls. We are looking for 5 new donors and feminine hygiene products for local high school girls. I don't know when the last time was you tried to buy any feminine hygiene project, but like gas, it has gone through the roof. I just bought some yesterday for the school nurse program, and a little box of tampons was like $10. So, and when somebody has to look for transportation or feminine hygiene products, what do you do? Anyway, thank you very much for asking us to speak.
Hi, I'm Rich Robinson. I'm marketing and community engagement with Rogue Retreat.
Rogue Retreat's mission is creating opportunities for hope and safety for people experiencing homelessness in the Rogue Valley. Every day we help people move from surviving to thriving. We're a local nonprofit funded by grants, donations, and we also have workforce development programs that we put the money earned to those right back into our programs. We provide full continuum of care from emergency low-barrier shelter at the Crossings and Kelly Shelter to transitional housing at our Hope Village and Crossings Village. We also have havens. We just opened a new seniors haven last October that has 11 beds. We also have our apartments, subsidized and unsubsidized, through Housing Authority of Jackson County and our Restart Retreats. We serve more than 550 people daily, and that includes meals, through our Hope Kitchen. Every participant receives case management and supportive services with peer supports, and we're all certified traditional healthcare workers who have lived experience and to help build trust and connection with our participants. We also have housed many people that have experienced domestic violence and abuse. Our medical respite program has expanded to 40 beds, reducing repeat ER visits and freeing up critical medical resources. Through workforce development, guests gain job training, resume support, and interview skills, and employment opportunities, In 2025, we served more than 1,300 individuals, and nearly half of them successfully moved on from our programs into stable housing. Here's a few ways you can help make this impact possible. A donation of $100 helps provide 33 meals through our Hope Kitchen. Last year, we served over 150,000 meals, so it's quite a few $100s. Also, $30 can get a pair of non-slip work shoes for our interns in the kitchen. We're also looking for volunteers, job mentors. We just got some new computers in our workforce development program to help people search for jobs, build resumes, apply online. So yeah, we need job mentors, house painters, gardeners, trained chefs. We just had someone come in and do knife training for our internship, meal servers. We also need supplies like hygiene items, twin bed sheet. I'm out of time, huh? All right, thank you very much. I appreciate your time, and I really appreciate this event. Thank you.
Oh, thanks. That's great. I wasn't expecting to have a slide because we didn't have a number there. So I'm Lindy. I'm from the Children's Advocacy Center of Jackson County. For those of you that aren't familiar with the Children's Advocacy Center, we provide forensic interviews, forensic medical exams, therapy, and family advocates to children and families who have experienced abuse, sexual abuse, physical abuse, or witnessed a major crime. Everything that we do is free of charge to the families. Everybody that comes through the door is given a family support case manager to help us connect families with most of the people here in this room to just make sure that all of their needs are met. One of the things that we need right now from everyone is help with our prevention program, which obviously we've hit on that this week here. Our newest classes are the Connect to Protect Kids, which is a high-quality, evidence-based and evidence and trauma-informed program designed to educate and empower children, youth, adults, organizations, and communities to protect children from abuse, exploitation, and other types of online harm. So it's risk and education, perpetration prevention, and bystander intervention strategies are all employed in that. And we would love to have some people come and help us get that launched out into the community. That's it. Thanks.
All right, you heard the needs. Now it's time to fill the needs. So I'm going to ask again for 100% participation. We're going to all stand up, and you're going to go and fill at least one need. Hopefully there was something in there that really resonated with you, a need that you thought, I can do that easily. So you're going to go out. We're just going to give 10 minutes. We'll go till 3:10, so 15 minutes. And for the agencies, when a need is met, go ahead and ring that bell. And we're going to be hearing for needs being met in real time, and hopefully we can hear just bells going off left and right. And I hope that just inspires you guys to know we are supporting the community. So let's do it. So we're going to start with a new award that we have never done before, which is an honorable mention. And so this year for our honorable mention, I know you just sat down, Melanie, but we're going to honor Melanie Madden. So, Melanie is somebody who you know because she's been at our table the last 2 days, and you also know her from the registration table. And she does that because she is a logistical genius. And I mean that literally. There is nothing this woman cannot figure out. She is so ordered and so organized. Melanie Madden is a dedicated member of Seroptimist. Yeah, we're not ready yet. Melanie, for you to leave. Melanie Madden is a dedicated member of Seroptimist Medford chapter, where they support women reaching their dreams, and you've heard from Seroptimist today. She is also on the planning committee of the NCOA Rogue Valley Veteran, supporting veteran suicide and local veteran organizations, and she's an active member at Rouge Community Church. Today, we are honoring Melanie for her many years on the board of directors at Disruptors.org. She has been here with us since day one, and actually before day one, because Melanie had my back and had been supporting me before this was even a dream. She's an advisor, an inspiration, and a dear friend. When I told Melanie today that I would be honoring her, she said to me, "Lauren, you know I like to give back in the background." Please join me in honoring Melanie Madden as our honorary member today. All right, next we're going to move on to our Advocate Award. So this person is very special to me as well. Janai Mestrovich, will you please make your way up here while I read your bio? So Janai Mestrovich, also known as Grandma Boom, who most of you probably recognize just from around town. Janai started her work in social emotional learning for children over 50 years ago. In this work, she teaches children to build conscience, to be able to self-regulate, to be able to make choices, to not cause harm, and to orient themselves with tools to get through life. Janai was co-producer and a host for a TV show aired by NBC, which won second place at the International New York Film and Television Festival worldwide. She has been published in journals and appointed to the Rosalind Carter editorial board, and was invited by the Surgeon General David Satcher to represent rural America in the National Children's Mental Health Conference. Yes, she has marched on Capitol Hill. She has delivered flyers to every single political officer in D.C. and has worked tirelessly for children to develop themselves to become healthy and happy human beings. She is a pioneer with prevention to get the skills taught to children at a young age, and the work that she does is preventing trafficking and making the world a better place. She is tireless in her energy, her commitment, and her joy. Thank you so much, Janai. I mean, you guys could stay on the stage, but I know not everybody wants to do that. All right, next up we have our Agency Award. I also just dropped the bomb on these people today that they were getting honored, half of them at least. Okay, this award is going to STSC, the Sex Trade Survivor Caucus. STSC brings together survivors from across the country to connect, organize, and engage in policy and advocacy work. STSC creates opportunities for survivors to share their experiences, inform decision-making, and participate in efforts that shape laws and systems. Through training, education, and advocacy, STSC supports survivors in building skills, strengthening communities, and contributing to policy conversations that impact all our lives. STSC has 67 members across the country, and they are growing. They helped draft and pass the hearsay law that JR was talking to you guys about today. Do you remember that law? They helped draft and get that passed alongside JR. They've testified against the country on the demand reduction bills, stricter punishments to defeat full decriminalization bills in Colorado, Oregon, Rhode Island, and they've helped pass vital legislation in Maine for the survivor model. We are really lucky that this national organization resides in Oregon. They are here to jump on the task for any local legislation that is alarming, and they also do things like provide travel scholarships for members to attend important national conferences. For example, just this year, they are sending 50 leaders, survivor leaders, to conferences across the country. So we actually have as you can see, 4 STSC members in the House today. And I just want to recognize Jay Benke, Zoe Bellator, Amara James, and Tina Sims for the agency award this year. All right, and last but not least, we have our 2026 Southern Oregon Human Trafficking Disruptors Summit Disruptor of the Year. This award is going to Susan Mohn. So Susan has worked in the field of sexual assault response and prevention since 1994. She was first as an advocate with the LA Commission of Assaults Against Women, and then as the founder in 2004 of the nonprofit Jackson County SART, and as former executive director of SART as well. So I think, are you technically in retirement? Yeah, so I'm gonna tell you, she is technically retired as executive director, and she's still doing this work as a volunteer. So she's also a founding member of the You Have Options program, which works to remove barriers to report sexual assault, and she advises for the national organization Stop Sexual Assault in Schools. She's a Title IX expert, has helped change legislation in Oregon to improve trauma-informed practices for law enforcement, and continues to volunteer her time as an advocate and educator for Jackson County SART. She's generous, loyal, and kind, and a true leader of change in our community. Come up here, Susan. And in leading up to the summit, I've been really out and about in the community, networking a lot, going around town. And I swear, everywhere I went, Susan was there. She was at this group, she was at this presentation, she was helping at this event. She is ferocious in her community advocacy, and her commitment to helping others has inspired so many of us. Even though she's retired, she's at all of these places. So please join me in awarding Susan Mohn as our Disruptor of the Year.
Are we done? Okay. I can't, which camera is
I didn't know where that